said going into it that it felt like for me that the team that I trusted the most in the AFC playoffs was Houston. And it feels weird to say because I don't trust their offense at all, but their defense is so good. Their defense is spectacular. And even going into that game last night, I thought that they were going to be really, really good. I didn't think they were going to be that good. I mean, they took over that game. They dominated from the word go. I mean, they hung around Pittsburgh. They hung around for quite some time. And C.J. Stroud forgot how to play football for a majority of that football game. He made a couple of nice throws. But they really couldn't put this one away aside from the fact that their defense just dominated. I felt like there was a chance that Pittsburgh wouldn't score yesterday. The way that Houston's defense is able to swarm, get after the quarterback to do what they need to do. And I think if C.J. Stroud didn't forget how to hold on to the football, they might not have scored. I mean, they were able to put together a drive or two that they were at least able to get into field goal range. But for the most part, Pittsburgh didn't have a chance last night. And we got to dive into the Pittsburgh angle of things here in just a second. But I think you look at what Houston did last night, and you look at the rest of the playoffs, and they're going to face off with New England. New England's good. I think anyone that was talking about the record and stuff, same stuff applied to this team last year, Washington, and look what they did in the playoffs. They were just fine. So I'm not necessarily all that worried about that when you look at what what New England's going to be able to do in the playoffs. But okay, so they can beat New England. They can beat Buffalo. They can beat Denver. That's the three teams on their side. And I don't know that you look on the other side and feel like, okay, maybe Seattle's the best team, but they can beat Seattle. They can go toe-to-toe with their defense. I don't know that their offense is going to stack up, but it just becomes who makes the least amount of mistakes and who do you trust more, Sam Darnold or C.J. Stroud. They can beat the Niners, who are beat the heck. They can beat Chicago. They can beat L.A. So do you pick them to win? I don't know that you pick them to win the Super Bowl, but the beauty of the NFL playoffs and beauty of this tournament, you just got to win one game at a time. You just got to win the one game ahead of you. And I don't know that I'd feel confident picking any team against Houston. I probably would pick against them with some of the teams that are left, but I'm not going to feel great about it because that defense is so, so good. I mean, what you saw from that pass rush last night with Danielle Hunter, with Will Anderson Jr., those guys are spectacular. Those guys can get after the passer like nobody else in the business in terms of a duo like that. Be able to have two guys that had 10-plus sacks getting after the quarterback on a regular basis. And then you look on the back end, and they've got great corners. Derek Stingley's one of the best corners in the league. I really like Jalen Petrie as a nickel back and someone that's going downhill, that's not afraid to break things up, not afraid to come up and play physical. Azeez Al-Shaair was doing a really good job in coverage yesterday, and we kind of know what his reputation is in terms of him being maybe a little bit of a dirty player, but he's going to set the tone defensively in terms of the physicality that they're going to bring. And that's what you saw yesterday from Houston was they are going to get after you and you are going to feel it. And you look on that Pittsburgh side, and I think there have to be real discussions about what you're going to do for the future of Pittsburgh. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, it sounds like he's done. You know, the broadcast sure made it sound last night like they either knew some stuff or they're kind of speculating, and they feel pretty good about the fact that that might be the last time we see Aaron Rodgers on an NFL field. And that very well may be the case. And so we'll see if any of that news comes out in the coming days. If I know anything about Aaron Rodgers from my time working in Milwaukee and seeing what happened and how he goes about things, this thing will linger for a little while. This isn't something that's suddenly going to just disappear. We're going to be lingering and waiting for a little bit on whether he's actually going to retire or not. But at the same point, I don't even know if you want him back if you're Pittsburgh. At some point, you've got to hit the reset button. And I think the bigger conversation here, because even if Rodgers returns next year, say he does come back, say they keep Mike Tomlin, say they keep Aaron Rodgers, they're going to be in the same boat next year. They'll probably find a way to get into the playoffs. They'll win 9 or 10 games. They'll finish above 500, which is apparently their Super Bowl now in Pittsburgh. They'll do that. They'll get into the playoffs. They'll lose in the first round. They'll get knocked out, and we'll be having the same discussion again next year. The exact same discussion. And I think the bigger question here is not really Aaron Rodgers. It's Mike Tomlin. And he's a good head coach. I don't think there's much question there. You can't do what he's done in his time in Pittsburgh with consistently subpar rosters since Ben Roethlisberger's retired, with consistently subpar quarterback play since Ben Roethlisberger's retired, and consistently get into the playoffs and finish above 500 or at 500, never below, like he's done. There's no questioning that he is a good head coach in the National Football League. I don't think he's a great head coach. I don't know that you're winning a Super Bowl the way that they keep doing the things that they keep doing. At some point, the standard in Pittsburgh, and I'd be saying the same thing if it were here, at some point, the standard has to be a Super Bowl, right? Like that's what it's always been in Pittsburgh. Has always been about Lombardi trophies. But seemingly over the last decade, or at least last 9 years, it's been about finishing above 500, making sure you get into the playoffs, but not worrying if you're going to have any chance of actually winning in the playoffs. If that's the case, it's time to move on. You've got to try something different. You look at some of the numbers for Mike Tomlin now and the company he keeps with his playoff record, which is now 8-12. He tied Marvin Lewis for the longest postseason losing streak of 9 straight games, or 7 straight games, excuse me. His last win was in 2016. He's the first Steelers head coach with a 9-year stretch without a playoff win. Grant Paulson tweeted this out last night. His 7-game losing streak, this is what it's been. A loss by 24, a loss by 14, a loss by 17, losing by 21, 11, 3, 19, 0-7 by an average margin of defeat of 15 points. That's just unacceptable. I think that's something that you just can't keep going on with. And if they want to say that it's about continuing the streak and getting into the playoffs every year and constantly being relevant, then sure. Then I can somewhat understand what you're doing there. But if the goal is to win a Super Bowl, which it should be for every team in the league, then I think it's time to move on. And someone might immediately chime in and say, well, who are you going to get that's better? To be honest with you, I'm not necessarily worried about that, because the way that it's going, I can't just get stuck here in mediocrity. The example I always go back to, and maybe it's not the best example because of some of the actual roster moves they made after this, but the Toronto Raptors consistently kept getting into the playoffs year after year, but they couldn't get over the top, to a point that Dwayne Casey even won Coach of the Year, if you remember. They fired him and hired Nick Nurse. Now, they also brought in Kawhi Leonard, which was a big part of them going on that finals run and winning it all. But I think you got to do something like that here where, okay, I know what Mike Tomlin is. If I want to get over the top, I got to take a little bit of a risk here. I got to take a little bit of a chance, because the chance is, okay, yeah, we could finish under 500. We could also find somebody that could propel us to heights that we haven't been at since Aaron Rodgers beat them in the Super Bowl back in Super Bowl 45. I mean, just think about this. The way that they've been losing, their last playoff win was in 2016. In 2016, I hadn't graduated high school yet. I've now finished high school, thankfully. I've now finished college, and I've been working in radio for a while. I wouldn't be hosting the show straight out of high school. Like, that's how ridiculous that it's gotten, where their last win being in 2016. When we think about Marvin Lewis, think about the connotation that comes with him and his Bengals teams. Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle. They were fun teams. They were good teams. I loved watching A.J. Green and some of those guys over there. They didn't win anything. The connotation of them was, okay, fun regular season team. When they get in, they're going to choke. So then why is it any different with Pittsburgh? I think the difference is those Bengals teams were actually better and more talented than Pittsburgh's teams have been over the last decade, probably. I mean, look at the quarterbacks that Mike Tomlin's had to roll with. Aaron Rodgers on his last leg, Kenny Pickett. I mean, the quarterback play there has been abysmal, and part of that is their own doing, because unfortunately, the way that the league works, especially when you're trying to replace an all-time great in a Ben Roethlisberger, the way that the league works, if you are going to continually live in mediocrity, you're going to continually live somewhere where you're not going to get that top draft pick, then you're not going to end up with that transcendent quarterback unless you can find somebody and identify somebody that everyone else missed out on the draft, or you're going to have to take a swing on somebody and spend big in free agency that is going to come with major red flags because good quarterbacks don't hit free agency. And so you look at next year, say they roll it back with Mike Tomlin. What's to make you think it's going to be any different? Because, by the way, this Steelers team, the fact that they got into the playoffs speaks to how bad the AFC North was this year. The fact that they won that division, that team was gross to watch this year. And while I like Aaron Rodgers, he's been one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. Not necessarily all the other stuff that comes with it, but watching Aaron Rodgers throughout his career has been a blast. One of the greatest throwers of the football, just effortless in what he was able to do in Green Bay. It kind of fell off once he moved out of there. But you saw some flashes at points this year. But for the most part, if you watched Pittsburgh this year, their offense was gross. Like it's disgusting to watch that offense. It was nothing explosive, nothing down the field. And I'm not even one that cares about having the most aesthetically pleasing offense. If it's effective, great. I don't know that their offense was particularly effective. Their offense, for the most part, was run the ball, which wasn't an explosive run game. And then when they would pass the ball, occasionally they would throw the ball down the field. And usually it's just a Hail Mary sort of throw by Aaron Rodgers to one of his receivers down the field. You saw a couple of those last night. None of those prayers were answered. Threw one to Calvin Austin, tried one over the middle to Pat Freiermuth. Occasionally they'll try something to DK Metcalf. But they're not doing anything crazy down the field. It's nothing creative to get guys open down the field. Sometimes they'll find somebody in the middle, but for the most part, I would say a large majority of their passing game is just dumping the ball off to Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell and hoping that they can make something out of nothing. That's not a good offense. And so to me, you got to move on from Aaron Rodgers. Even if he wants to come back, I'm good. I'm good on that. Even though I like Aaron and what he's able to do, I don't think at this point in his career, what he gives you, his offenses have looked the same since he's left Green Bay, because even though you have different offensive coordinators, even though you have different minds, he wants to do things his way. And the problem for Aaron Rodgers is in his mind, he can still do stuff that 26-year-old Aaron Rodgers can do into his 40s, and he can't. If you had 26-year-old Aaron Rodgers behind center, it's a totally different story doing some of the stuff. He can move around. He can run a little bit. He can do all those different things. Not at this point in his career. At this point in his career, you need to have somebody that can do a little bit more than what he can do. So I'd be good moving on there. But I really think if you're Pittsburgh, I think it's time. You just saw your rival, Baltimore, get to a point where they said, that's it. I'm good. It's time to move on. And I think at some point you got to follow suit here. I think you got to say this idea of getting into the playoffs every year is great and fun, but I need to have more than that. I need to have more than that. I can't continue just to barely squeak into the back end of the playoffs and get crushed all the time. I mean, the Wizards did that for years here, right? They would live to get to that 8th seed. And we got so frustrated by the idea of why the heck would you continually just try to sneak into the back end of the playoffs just to lose in the first round, just to get dismissed by an actual basketball team? And we were screaming for the mountaintops, move on, move on, move on. And Pittsburgh fans are doing the same thing. I don't know if I'd have to go back and see if I heard the exact audio correctly. But as they were walking off the field last night in Pittsburgh at Acrisure Stadium, or Heinz Field as I'll always call it, as they're walking off the field, Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers, I think I heard a fan, and I think it was a Pittsburgh fan, yell, "Retire, Aaron!" Like, enough of that. And we'd already heard fire Tomlin chants. So it's not as if me sitting here in our DC studios is coming up with something new for Pittsburgh fans. They felt this way for a while, and I felt this way for a while with Tomlin. Awesome. You're going to find a way another year where we're thinking, oh, they're probably going to win 7 games, and they'll find a way to win 9 or 10. They'll get into the playoffs and lose. But that can't just be the continuous cycle, right? Like, at some point, you've got to find something more to achieve. And that might come at the expense of, God forbid, Pittsburgh finishing with a poor season and drafting inside the top 10. I know that's unheard of, and it wouldn't feel right. And watching a Pittsburgh Steelers game where they're not contending for a playoff spot, or watching a Pittsburgh Steelers game where Mike Tomlin is not on the sideline, isn't going to feel right. It's going to look really, really weird. But at some point, you've got to get back to the fact that it's about winning Super Bowls. And when's the last time that a Mike Tomlin-led team, and it's not all his fault, by the way, like I've said, his roster is haven't exactly been the best either, but when's the last time a Mike Tomlin-led team was a Super Bowl contender? It's been quite some time. And this Houston team is pretty good. Like I talked about, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat just about anybody left on the schedule. I wouldn't feel good for them as a legit Super Bowl champion contender. But at the same point, I don't know that there's a whole lot of teams I'm picking against them because their defense is so nasty. But it's not like they're the Tom Brady-led New England Patriots. It's not like they're the Peyton Manning-led Colts or even the Peyton Manning-led Broncos. Like, we're not talking about an all-time great team here, at least I don't think. And it's not like all-time great teams have been the ones that have just dispatched the Steelers every year. So at some point, you've got to change course, and I think now is the right time to do it. I like Mike Tomlin. He'll immediately get snatched up somewhere, whether it's as another head coach or whether it's as a TV analyst. I think he'd be fantastic at that. I think Mike Tomlin is a really good football coach, but at some point, and sometimes it runs its course. I mean, it's similar to me. A lot of discussion has been had about Matt LaFleur and the Green Bay Packers, and I don't know that there's a better coach out there than Matt LaFleur. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can't make the move. And I think sometimes we get stuck in that idea of, well, who's going to be better? Well, someone might be better. We just don't know it yet. Sometimes you just have to make a move, though, because something has gone wrong. Matt LaFleur would have missed the playoffs the last couple of years if there wasn't a 7 seed added to the NFC playoffs or the NFL playoffs. He would have not made the playoffs multiple years in a row. You look at how that game was handled and the second half collapse. That happens all the time for Green Bay. You look at their special team issues. That happens all the time for Green Bay. I don't love operating under the premise that, well, if we can't upgrade, then we can't make a move. Sometimes you do. Is there a risk involved? There 100% is a risk involved. You could fire the guy and end up with some donk that doesn't know what they're doing, and you could end up in a cycle where you only win 5 games 2 years in a row. That is 100% possible. You could also find someone that lights a fire under the guys' butts and gets them going and playing better than the previous head coach did. So there's always a risk, and there's pros and cons to everything. But at some point, the standard, especially for the Steelers, more so than really any other organization over the last decade, at some point, a storied franchise like Pittsburgh, you've got to look at it and say, we can't keep doing this. Or we've got to have a real evaluation of what we're trying to do here. Are we just trying to keep this streak alive? Because if we're just trying to keep this streak alive, then let me jump off the ship here and let me jump back on when you guys are trying to win Super Bowls. Let me get back on when we're going back to what you have always tried to do in Pittsburgh, and that's add to that Lombardi Trophy case. If that's the case, then I'll be back on board. But if you're going to consistently go here and just say, yeah, we'll just find some retread old quarterback that can get us to 9 wins, that can get us to 10 wins, and that's all we care about. If that's all you care about, if I were a Pittsburgh fan, I'd just be done. I'd say, that's it. It's not that I'm not going to keep cheering for you, but I can't keep doing this year after year after year. And they've got good football players. You know, they've got TJ Watt. They've got Alex Highsmith. They've got a lot of good guys on that defense. But at some point, it's got to be about winning football games and winning more than just the 9 or 10 in the regular season to get into the playoffs. I've got to start winning playoff games. I got to start competing for something that really matters again, something that actually is going to go down as something that really, really matters. And it's a credit to Tomlin, what he did at the beginning of his career and his head coaching career. But the fact that he's now tied Marvin Lewis for the longest postseason losing streak, and they haven't won a game since 2016. He's the first Steelers head coach with a 9-year stretch without a playoff win. I think it's time to move on. It's crazy to think that we've gotten to this point, but I kind of feel like this is maybe even a couple of years too late to make this sort of a move. All right, I want to take a quick look at the divisional round coming up next, as well as there's a stat rolling around about Sean McVay that his playoff opponents, he's never faced the same opponent twice. How crazy is that? We'll talk about it next. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan on the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. Welcome back. It is the Kevin Sheehan Show. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. He'll be back at 10 o'clock tomorrow. 301-230-0980 if you'd like to hop in as we talk about the divisional round. Just taking a quick look at some of these games. Also want to throw out this Sean McVay stat, which I find incredibly odd. And I love when you get these weird little stats. So Sean McVay has now coached, I believe this will be his 15th playoff game coming up in the divisional round. And it'll be the 15th different team that he'll face. 15. How do you not face the same team twice? That doesn't seem real. Like, that doesn't seem like it should be possible. But if you go back, 2017 faced the Falcons. 2018, Cowboys, Saints, and Patriots. 2020, Seahawks and Packers. 2021, Cardinals, Buccaneers, Niners, Bengals. 2023, the Lions. Last year, Vikings and Eagles. This year, so far, Panthers and then the Bears. I mean, he's almost gotten through the entire NFC. I think the Commanders got to get into the playoffs next year and play them. So that way, they haven't played them yet. So that can make it 16. That's just wild.
He's got a what? So the Niners are the only team remaining in the NFC that he's faced in the playoffs? 'Cause I'm trying to see how long we can get this to go.
Let's see. Did I say Seahawks?
I don't think you did.
He did Seahawks. So if
so
they
he's
win,
on a collision course.
If they win, it'll be the second time that they face somebody.
Wow.
So if they move past the Bears, then this streak comes to an end. If not, though, Washington's on the clock.
That's right, baby.
They've got to face them next year. It's wild, though. I mean, I don't even understand how you can get to that point, that you've played this long, you've had this many games coached in the postseason, and yet you still haven't faced the same team twice. But let's take a quick look ahead to the divisional round matchups. Bills and Broncos comes up at 4:30 on Saturday, and then Niners and Seahawks at 8 o'clock on Saturday. Some of these teams get screwed a little bit with some of the travel and everything going on, but the number one seeds seemingly always play at on Saturday. By the way, Tay in the chat says that the Texans defense is what he wants our defense to look like and play aggressive on all three levels.
Me too.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my one takeaway. If you're going like, hey, what's your takeaway from watching the wild card round? My takeaway would be, can I get the Texans defense here? I don't know what we got to do that, but can we have that here? Because imagine that defense with Jaden Daniels.
Oof.
You know, Jaden has gotten used to throughout his career having to play Superman from the word go. And I'm not just talking about here. Go back and watch his Heisman campaign at LSU. Every single time he scores, they'll cut to the next time he's on the field, and there's 7 more points on the board for the other team because his defense couldn't stop anybody. So this year probably reminded him a little bit of that LSU year where he had to do a little bit too much. And I think that's part of the issue as well that no one really wants to talk about with how he played this year at times is I think he was pressing a little bit because he understood the defense couldn't stop anybody. Regardless, Saturday's games for the divisional round, Bills and Broncos. The Broncos are intriguing to me because they remind me a little bit of how the Texans are built. Obviously, they had a better year, 14-3. They've been really, really good and best team in the AFC in terms of record. They're led by their defense. They've got a quarterback that can be up and down. Sean Payton, I think, is a really, really good offensive mind, and he's going to be able to put together a good game plan. But can they stop Josh Allen? Or can they at least keep Josh Allen from going Superman mode and going and winning the game by himself? Because Jacksonville, they played fairly well. Like, it was a good football game between the two of them. And when the time came, Josh Allen said, screw it. Well, basically, the entire game was like that. But when the time came to go win the game, Josh Allen did it. And I don't know if the Broncos have that, but at the same point, their defense is much better than Jacksonville's. They're very, very good. They're good at everything on the defensive side. On the offensive side, though, it comes down to Bo Nix. Are you able to get enough out of him? Are you able to scheme enough that he doesn't have to go play that spectacularly if they just are able to play in their system? So we'll see. I think that one's a really intriguing game, and both one seeds are similarly built in that they are led by their defense. The Seahawks will take on the Niners, and that Seahawks defense might be the only one that gives the Texans any talk of, oh, okay, maybe that's actually the top defense. Those are the only two. Like, those are the top dogs, Houston and Seattle. And we just saw this game, Seattle and San Francisco in week 18, and San Francisco couldn't get anything going. They couldn't do anything. They lost 13-3, and they had no chance of moving the football or doing anything. I'm curious if it's a little bit different this time around, but there's going to be no George Kittle. Christian McCaffrey struggled to run the ball all year. He's been good in the passing game, but they haven't been able to run the ball with him. And I do think that it's a pretty simple way to slow down the Seahawks offense, but no one's been able to accomplish it. I think the recipe is simple. You find a way to slow down JSN, because you look at their passing game, you look at the numbers in their passing game, and their second leading receiver is Cooper Kupp, who is 1,200 yards, 1,200 behind JSN. Jackson Smith-Njigba finished the year with 1,793. Should be the offensive player of the year. Cooper Kupp finished at 593. That's insane. The difference between their number 1 and number 2 receivers is 1,200 yards. I think it's simple. You got to slow down JSN. But it's not that simple because no one's been able to do it. So if you can find a way to at least keep JSN in check, it's not like their running game generally is all that effective. They're averaging just 4.1 a pop on the year. Charbonnet's averaging 4. Kenneth Walker's averaging 4.6. They got a little bit of that running game going against San Francisco last time out, and San Francisco has struggled to getting a pass rush with some of their injuries. So if Sam Darnold's comfortable back there, but I truly think that if you're San Francisco, you're just going into this game saying, can we keep the game close so that in the fourth quarter, potentially Sam Darnold can give us the game? Because Sam Darnold still hasn't shown me just yet that he's the guy that we've seen in the regular season in a clutch moment. He's been really good. At this point, you can't deny that he's a really good quarterback in the NFL. I just don't know if he has the clutch gene yet. And from what we saw in Minnesota last year, from what we've seen at times in Seattle in big moments, he's come up a little bit short. But for the most part, he's been really, really good. You don't get to 14-3 without that. And in their last game, week 18, you're playing for the 1 seed. He didn't lose on the football game. So we'll see if he's been able to grow from his time in Minnesota. But if I'm San Francisco, just try to keep this one close, and I'll take my chance with the Brock Purdy on my side versus Sam Darnold on their side. But I don't feel great when I'm severely undermanned on the offensive side of the ball. I have not really been able to run the ball all year, and I'm going up against a stellar Seattle defense. I think both 1 seeds, you feel pretty good about finding a way to win that one. Sunday, the 2 matchups will be Texans and Patriots. That Texans defense against Drake May is going to be so fun to watch. You know, the MVP voting's already been turned in, and you've got both potential MVP candidates playing on Sunday with Matt Stafford and Drake May. But Drake May has a real chance to give his signature moment of this season if he can beat this Texans defense, because he played well. He played okay in their game on Sunday. He didn't play spectacularly. He wasn't the main reason why they won. Their defense did a really, really good job. Justin Herbert wasn't as sharp as you would expect, even though he's kind of choked in the playoffs as well. But Drake May has a real chance. If he can beat this Texans defense that made Aaron Rodgers look like he had no chance, that has made many quarterbacks, many teams this year look like they had no chance. If he can find a way to get things going against them, then that can be the signature performance. Even if he does or doesn't win MVP, and that doesn't necessarily count towards it because it's in the playoffs and the votes have already been turned in, this could be a signature performance. So I'm very interested to watch this one. Like I said, with Houston, it's kind of up to their offense. Like, what are you going to get out of CJ Stroud? Is he going to play like an idiot at times and not be able to hold on to the football? Is he just going to throw the ball away to the Patriots defense for no reason, like he did last night with Pittsburgh at one point down in the red zone? If he does that, then I would take New England pretty handily. But if he can just play smart, I mean, legitimately, the best part about having a defense like Houston is if I tell CJ going in this week, dude, please do not turn the ball over. If we punt the ball, that's not a loss. That's not that big of a deal if we have to punt. I just need you to find a way to get us to 17 points if possible. 17, that's all you need. And some of that could be Drake May makes a mistake and we're already in field goal position. Please don't turn the ball over again. Some of that could be We hit one explosive. We get a good kick return. We get a good punt return. So, to me, I don't know that I would pick Houston in this game, but I don't know how you pick against Houston at the same point. Their defense is just so good. The rest of the way, I'll take my chances with them and just see what happens. The final game of the weekend, Rams and Bears. I'm curious to see how this game plays out. The Rams look like the best team in football for a majority of the season. And then the last couple of weeks looked really, really bad. And then last week, in the wild card round on Saturday, everyone just assumes, which, by the way, going forward, please don't do this. Don't just assume that the team that gets it 8-9, losing record, they're not going to be any good. This is going to be a terrible football game to watch. I'd have to go look up the exact numbers again, but 4 out of the 5 games with a losing record where a team gets into the playoffs, 4 of the 5 instances, 2 of them they have won, and the other 2 that they've lost were within a score. The only one that hasn't been was Dallas and Tampa, I believe in 2022. That was a 31-14 game. But we remember the Washington football team with Taylor Heineke. That was a fun game against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. You remember the beast mode run with Seattle back in the day? That was with a sub 500 team that beat the Saints with Drew Brees. So it can happen, and it happens pretty regularly, that when one of these teams gets in, they play well enough that it's still a good football game. That's something to watch with going forward for those. But I'm curious to see if the Rams can recapture the way that they played earlier in the year. Because if they continue to play like this, they can win because they're still so talented, but one of these other teams is going to play better and just beat them. Now, they're in the divisional round, so it's not like they have that far to go. You got to win divisional round, NFC Championship, Super Bowl. You've got to find a way to get going and scrape your way across the finish line 3 more times. So it's not like they need to figure this out long, for another 7 or 8 games. But you've got to start playing better. Because Chicago, they kind of do the same thing. So that's what makes this matchup a little bit interesting, is the way that the Rams have played, they allow people to hang around. The way that the Bears have played, they stink for a half and then come back in the second half. And they're able to just figure things out late. And we watched that Packers game. I mean, everyone was writing them off at halftime. I was like, oh, okay, this is typical. This is what I expected. They still can't get over the hump of being the son to Green Bay. I didn't think they were going to be able to beat them. And all of a sudden, Green Bay forgot how to play football, and Chicago gets rolling. So this football game could be interesting, because if the Rams do the same thing where they just don't dominate and they allow the Bears to hang around even if they're playing bad football, the Bears are liable to come back and win the thing, because that's what they just did. And the Rams having to go play in the cold. Looks like early look ahead forecast, 17 degrees and potentially some inclement weather, maybe some snow at Soldier Field on Sunday night. I get fired up for that. But that's going to be an interesting matchup as well. I didn't realize that Caleb Williams' completion percentage was so poor this year, completing only, I believe it was 58% of his passes this year, which is not very efficient by modern NFL standards because of the way that a lot of things have changed. Back in the day, when you're throwing the ball down the field all the time, pushing it down the field, 58% wasn't as bad. Now, considering how much stuff is around the line of scrimmage and a lot of offenses hate operating behind the chains, that 58% is pretty bad. But you saw in that game, he's unbelievable when he's able to create outside of structure. That's some of the stuff that I believed in when he was coming out of USC. I mean, seriously, the throw that he made on 4th and 8, rolling to his left, finding Adunze, I think there's maybe one other guy in the league that makes that type of throw. I'm not saying that other guys can't throw or make that throw, but the way that he did it, where his hips are facing the wrong way, he's able to flip his shoulders around and rip that thing, that's Mahomes-esque. That's why when he was coming out of college, his really main comp was Patrick Mahomes. No one was arguing that he was as good as Patrick Mahomes, but the stuff that he can do out of structure is Mahomes-esque. And we'll see if he's able to recapture some of that magic, get that run game going a little bit. maybe they go on a run. I personally am rooting against Ben Johnson. I need that experiment and that whole thing to be done. I don't necessarily care that he was yelling bleep the Packers in the locker room, and I need him to be a little more professional when he's shaking Matt LaFleur's hand, but I would love for there to be a little bit more animus and rivalries in professional sports. So I have no issue with some of the locker room antics, but it'll be a heck of a matchup. Heck of a wild card, heck of a divisional round coming up, and heck of a wild card weekend this past weekend. All the games were really, really good to watch. And I guess last night would fall under the biggest blowout, but it was close even into the fourth quarter. It was 7-6 in the fourth quarter. So even though it wasn't the most entertaining game to watch last night, still was a good one. Ryan Fowler going to join us coming up at 11 o'clock when I continue talking about the NFL, though. Outside of Josh Allen, who was won an MVP, Matt Stafford, he might win the MVP this year. Which quarterback do you trust the most going into the divisional round of the playoffs? We'll talk about it next. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan.
All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. We start off with a dominant defense performance from the Houston Texans last night as they beat the crap out of the Pittsburgh Steelers 30-6, including 2 defensive touchdowns from one of the best in football. The divisional round is now set. Here's the slate for this upcoming weekend. Saturday, the Bills take on the Broncos in Denver. That'll be at 4:30 on Saturday on CBS. Saturday night, 49ers, they take on the Seahawks at 8 p.m. That will be on Fox. Moving to Sunday, the Texans, they travel up to Foxborough. That'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern. That'll be on ESPN and ABC. And the Rams, they take on the Bears in Chicago at 6:30 on NBC to close out the weekend. Plus, according to Ian Rappaport, the Commanders are interested in interviewing Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores for their open position. Flores' contract with Minnesota is up, and he's able to pursue other similar roles around the NFL. Also, the Commanders have requested to interview Falcons assistant and son of Doug Williams, DJ Williams, to be the quarterback or for the quarterback coach position. Also in the running is Panthers assistant quarterbacks coach Mike Bercovici, who also crossed paths with Jaden Daniels at Arizona State in 2019. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command throughout all of this offseason. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. Coming up in about 10 minutes, Ryan Fowler from Fansided going to join us. Want to get his thoughts looking ahead to the NFL draft. Also, his thoughts on David Blau being hired as the OC. Also, get his thoughts on the NFL playoffs as a whole. But looking at the rest of the playoffs, I think it's interesting because so often we spend time talking about the quarterbacks and coaches and those kind of being the difference and the deciding factors a lot of times. You know, if it's a toss-up between two teams, which it can become when you get to this late into the playoffs, the divisional round, you've only got 8 teams left. It kind of becomes, okay, which quarterbacks do you trust the most? And that generally can be the teams that you feel good about and who you might pick to go win the whole thing or meet in the Super Bowl. I think you've got two clear sides here and which quarterbacks you trust. Josh Allen, we know what we think of him. He could go win the game by himself against Denver in the divisional round. Matt Stafford has played at a really high level this year. Potentially the MVP. It's either him or Drake May. And what he's been able to do. I do think the conversation around Matt Stafford's been a little bit interesting. Real quick, as a side note. He's been good throughout his career. This idea that he's just a no-doubt Hall of Famer and some of those things, I think is a little bit crazy because I think people, I don't know if they just don't, they misremember his Detroit days. Like, he was good in Detroit. There's no question about it. But he was never elite in Detroit, in my opinion. Maybe the last year or two, he got better. It's funny when you get this dichotomy. I didn't get to watch Brett Favre for his entire career. But when I spent time in Green Bay, they talked about how when Sterling Sharp went down, he actually improved as a quarterback because it forced him to play quarterback and not just throw to the best guy. I feel that way about Matt Stafford with Calvin Johnson. I actually think he got better when Calvin Johnson was done, which is weird to say. But instead of just saying, screw it, Calvin's down there somewhere, he actually had to play quarterback, and I think he improved. He's been incredible in his time in LA, so I don't have an issue talking about how good he's been, but I do think some of the career milestone and always been, I think he's a little bit overrated in that sense, but this year he's been incredible. He's been either number 1 or number 2 best quarterback in the league this season. But when you come to this point in the playoffs, you trust Stafford, you trust Josh Allen. I think you look through the rest, though, try to figure out who you trust. It's a big question. You know, you go on the AFC side, it's either going to be Bo Nix, CJ Stroud, or Drake May. I think one of those guys you could potentially trust, and Drake May, but this will be his second playoff game. He struggled a little bit getting things going. By the way, one of the things that sold me on Jaden, bringing this back to Washington, was how he played down the stretch of last season and into the playoffs. So people that are questioning him, I can understand some of that stuff, but I've watched quarterbacks play at a really high level and then crumble in crunch time, crumble in big opportunities, crumble in the playoffs. And you didn't see that from Jaden last year because even when they got smoked in the NFC Championship game, Jaden played fine. It was just other guys maybe weren't up for the moment, or they got outcoached, or they just got outplayed, whatever it may be. Plenty of different reasons. It wasn't because Jaden somehow played the worst game of his career. So that's part of what sold me on him. You're starting to see now some of the other guys in that class. Drake May. Little slow start, got things going later. They win that playoff game. Curious to see how he does in his second playoff game, if he can play at the same level he did during the regular season. Because, like I said, it's him and Stafford, 1-2 for MVP, depending upon which one you choose there. But we'll see how he does. Bo Nix, what's he going to look like in a big moment in the playoffs against Josh Allen? He doesn't have to do it all. He's going to be able to rely on his defense a lot more than some of these other guys, but we'll see what he's able to do. And we saw CJ Stroud last night. I like CJ. I think he's a talented quarterback. And I think in terms of guys in the AFC, you know, once you get behind Allen and May, you know, I think he can make more stuff happen than Bo Nix. But at the same point, he's a roller coaster compared to Bo Nix, who's a little more steady Eddie, it feels like, but maybe doesn't have the highs of what CJ Stroud can accomplish at times. But regardless, I don't, the answer for the AFC behind Josh Allen has probably got to be Drake May. But I just want to see it one more time from May in the playoffs. Not to say that he choked at all. You know, I've seen choke jobs. I've seen what Sam Darnold did last year in Minnesota. So he didn't play at that level, but it's not like he was the same guy. So we'll see if he can carry over some of that really good regular season play, but he's going to be going up against a really tough defense. On the NFC side, Caleb Williams is intriguing because he can make plays that not many other players in the NFL can make at the quarterback position. He also can make those same plays in the opposite direction where you're like, what the heck are you doing, dude? He's inaccurate. He misses easy throws. And yet, in big moments, when you need to create something out of nothing, he can do that too. So he'll be a fun watch against the Rams. And then Sam Darnold, I still don't trust. And Brock Purdy, I still don't know what to make of him. You know, like his arm strength is marginal, it feels like, but he can play at a really high level. And then at times he can throw boneheaded interceptions. I mean, they did well enough to beat the Eagles, but there were a couple of throws that Brock Purdy had in that game where you're like, what are you thinking? That's not the place to go. You don't have the arm to be making throws like that. So I think in the NFC side, the guy that you trust the most, as crazy as it may sound, probably is Brock, but it's just because I don't really believe in Sam Darnold still until he shows it to me. And Caleb Williams is just a little too inconsistent at this point. I like Caleb. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback in this league, but I still think he's a little too inconsistent at this point, just on a down-to-down basis. But the highs for Caleb Williams are better than just about anybody left in the playoffs, which is crazy to say because Stafford and Josh Allen are still left, and Drake May. But when Caleb Williams does what Caleb Williams can do, it can be pretty special to watch. You saw it at the end of that Bears and Packers game. All right, let's talk to Ryan Fowler next. Want to get his thoughts on some of the moves of the offseason so far. David Blau, want to get his thoughts on the NFL draft and who Washington should be looking at with the 7th pick as well. Ryan Fowler from Fansided comes up next here on the Kevin Sheehan Show. It is the Kevin Sheehan Show. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. He'll be back tomorrow. Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. You can listen there, always live and free on the Odyssey app as well. Time now to get out to our guest, Ryan Fowler from Fansided, going to join us. Ryan, how you doing today?
Doing well, Toby. Always appreciate having me on, man.
Absolutely, man. I think it's been a crazy Wildcard weekend. Started off Friday with Commanders making some news as well at offensive coordinator. So let's start right there with David Blau. I was on the air live reacting, and I would say that I was a little bit surprised and skeptical. I do understand that there's optimism. A lot of people looking at it immediately. I even saw that you tweeted out similar sentiment saying you've had young guys in this building before that were up-and-comers that you let leave, and they didn't want that to happen with David Blau. Dan Quinn had that similar experience with his time in Atlanta. Sell me on why this is the right move for them.
Yeah, I could definitely understand, right, the skepticism that is going to exist. And absolutely, Toby, there's going to be some speed bumps, right, this year. But I think the biggest thing for me when looking at this thing, and I didn't want to compare it, right, directly to what was that staff in 2013 where there's names in abundance scattered across the NFL. Everybody knows that. But I think when you look at the relationship and the continuity that is so big with a quarterback and a guy inside the building. And David Blau understands the position. He's played the position. And someone that is a young guy that's looking to prove himself, potentially, obviously, the goal, like Cliff Kingsbury, is to be a head coach sometime in this league, whether that's in Washington or not. I think the biggest thing is continuity. Now, he's been with Jaden Daniels through 2 regular seasons, healthy or not. He's been with him preparing for 3 playoff games. That matters. And I think when looking at how this offense is going to continue to expand and what he's going to do, he's going to have some principles of what Cliff ran last year, but I think it's going to be a little bit more under center. I think we're going to see a little more wide zone. You're going to see both Laramie Tunsil and Josh Connolly get out in space a little bit more. You're going to see some more pulling guards as well. I want to see Sam Cosmi get out more in space, work up to the second level. That's when they were at their best. That's when Bill Merritt really got going this year, Toby. So I think overall, yes, there are some questions to be asked as far as the quick elevation for David Blau. But I'm excited to just potentially sit back, watch these guys go to work, kind of work off of each other, and then see what you have here working forward towards next year.
One of the things that I think is a big question for me is looking at him building a system and kind of, I mean, he's never called plays before. I mean, the highest he's ever been is assistant quarterback coach. So in a lot of ways, while he's been under these different guys, he has influences. He kind of building his own offense still at the same point. Do you think that can almost be a positive where, you know, what he's working at with as a coach, he's been here. Like, it's not like he's working off of it. He has experience as a quarterback in other systems, but when he's building this thing, he's building the offense with Jaden Daniels in mind. He's building it with Terry McLaurin in mind and with the guys that they have, and they're going to add to the offense as well. But do you think that can be a positive as well?
Yeah, exactly. And I think he knows, again, the skill sets that are in the building. Now, am I going to sit here and say that David Blau preached for guys like Luke McCaffrey, Ben Sinnott, Jalen Lane in the draft like Cliff Kingsbury possibly did? You know, I can't sit here and say that. And there may be some skill sets that he likes in this 2026 draft class or in the free agent class that he's going to add to this group. You know, but I think, again, the pillars of his offense are going to be a little bit more under center again. And I think when you understand the skill sets that you have, specifically number 5 under center when he's healthy and what he can be to lead this offense and mask really any inefficiencies that you have, again, everything's not going to be perfect next year. I don't expect this team to go out there and you know, score 35-plus points a game in their first 8 weeks. But I will say this, and that it's going to take time for opposing defenses to kind of get a gist of really what the Commanders are going to do from a structural perspective on offense, similarly to what and really how some defenses adjusted to what Cliff Kingsbury was doing when he got predictable in the ground game, I thought, mainly in this year too, even when Jaden was on the football field. So I'm right there with you. I completely agree with you. He understands the skill sets that are in the building. And I'm just excited to see what this thing's going to look like, because I do think they have the potential in the world to really get back to what their 2024 success looked like. I really do.
Talking with Ryan Fowler here on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan. Last one on the offense before we get to the defense and some reports today. How much patience do you think they get here? I mean, with a guy in his first year calling plays, taking a big jump from assistant quarterback coach to the offensive coordinator chair, you would seem like that seems like a move you wouldn't make when Dan Quinn seemingly could be on the hot seat. And if things go sideways real quick, I mean, are we having conversations mid-year about his job security? Like, how patient can you realistically be with David Blau?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I'll even play devil's advocate here from Dan Quinn's perspective in that, I'm not going to say that he just hired or elevated, if you will, his potential replacement. But if you go into this year and this offense gets back to the success of 2024, this is just how the NFL cycle works. And you know that, Toby, and that he'll get, head coach interviews working into next cycle. And if Dan Quinn's defense doesn't improve, which I know we're going to get to, after 2 years back to back of it was absolutely abysmal. That's a question that you're going to have to answer next year. So I think the leash is going to be long. I do. Dan Quinn right now is not going anywhere. Adam Peters isn't going anywhere. And David Blau is not going anywhere. They're going to give him every shot to be a guy that can lead this thing. But if there's moments where, certain high leverage third downs, the high level games against the Eagles, Giants, and Dallas Cowboys, and you're not executing at a level that you want to, there should be people held accountable. If it's not Blau, if it's not Dan Quinn, then that's Adam Peters' job and Josh Harris's job to then look at this thing and make changes that are necessary, even if it is David Blau just 1 year and they're potentially moving on from a guy next year, even though you don't want to do that with Jaden Daniels next year moving into year 4, which will be his third offensive coordinator.
Yeah, it gets kind of crazy, but that's stuff for next year. Hopefully we're talking about, hopefully it's good reasons to be talking about that sort of stuff and not firing people. Maybe it's other people leaving for other jobs. Talking with Ryan Fowler here on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan. Defensive side of the ball, we found out today from reports that the team is interested in Brian Flores. We've heard some other names. Patrick Graham has been interviewed. I'd be interested in some guys that potentially could be retained at their previous jobs with Jeff Ulbrich and Jim Schwartz, but if they were to become available, I'd be interested. What do you make of the defensive coordinator candidates? Who's the guy that you would like, and what do you make of the Brian Flores stuff today as well?
Yeah, I think my focus, Toby, is, it's a big name, similar to how we talked about Mike McDaniel on the opposite side of the ball. But for me, I'm a little bit of a throwback type of guy on the defensive side of the ball. You got to get after people. You can really take the will of someone offensively. And when you look at this defense the last 2 years and the additions and subtractions that they've tried to make to be a group that, in Joe Witt's defense where you played cover 3 and you tried to attack downhill, no one was scared of this Washington defense where they had to consistently outscore people. When you look at Brian Flores, when even you look at a guy like Raheem Morris, you look at a guy like Jeff Ulbrich, Jim Schwartz, specifically what he did with that Cleveland front 7 this year with a guy like Carson Schlesinger, this is a situation to where you got to get after people. Flores' 6'1" defense, his ability to really revolutionize what you do within the front 7 and getting after people, forcing mistakes, even if you have the protection to protect. This is a situation where I think Brian Flores is candidate number 1 for me. If it's candidate number 2, I think it's Ulbrich and Schwartz right there with me. So I just think overall on this defensive side of the ball, you have to get a guy in the building that really just doesn't preach physicality, aggressiveness, and making plays in the football. You got to get a guy that wants to get the personnel in the building with his mindset to match up everything at all 3 levels. Because there are some young players present, Toby, on this Commanders defense that can make some plays. Now it's just allowing those guys to really fly around. Like we saw Frankie Louvu, right, in 2024. You need more of that. You need to allow guys to not be pegged into a round peg into a square hole. Just let them go after it. That's what Brian Flores does. He is my candidate number 1 right now. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, then you move on to a couple other candidates that I do like.
Ryan, when you look at a Flores defense, it feels like they're going to obviously need to spend a lot of resources to improve that defense regardless. What do you want them to go after? And secondly, can I pitch you on something? I know you're a big draft guy. How about a Brian Flores defense and Arvell Reese falls to 7?
That's a dream, right? That's a dream, right? That's a dream addition that I think Brian Flores specifically would absolutely like. And that's a great question as far as, that's because people always say, hey, look, we're just going to get this coordinator and all of a sudden it's going to work, right? You got to get the personnel to match the scheme and what you're trying to do. And I think if you add a guy, even Arvell Reese or his teammate in Caleb Downs drops, these hybrid type of players that can play at multiple levels, that can assist you in sealing the edges in the ground game that the Commanders haven't been able to do in nearly a decade, or shut down the tight end over the middle of the field, which you've been unable to do on 3rd and 8s and plus for the last 5 years. That's a dream type of addition, I think, for me at 7, either Downs or Reese, or whether you like a David Bailey or a Reuben Bain, of course. But I think in this defense, you need more linebackers, you need more edge rushers that can win in isolation, and you do need maybe 1 or 2 more safeties that can play multiple levels and change the math, if you will, defensively for yourself a little bit.
Talking with Ryan Fowler here on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan. Want to talk about the NFL draft. You mentioned some of the names. Caleb Downs at the top of my draft board. I know the talk about safety and those sorts of things. with this draft class and the way that it is, I've heard some people talk about, say you almost have to throw out some of the positional value and some of the things that we generally think about because of where the top players are at and what positions they're at. But you just talked about it there with Caleb Downs. You'd be fine if they went with him at 7, because that's my top guy as well.
Yeah, he is my top guy on the board. He is. I think that's someone where right away you know that you're going to get a guy that can just impact all 3 levels of this defense. Coverage, run game, the instincts, the leadership that he's going to provide. And I'm not just talking about, the John Allen leadership where you see him in a pregame speech and then he goes out and puts out a dud for a month. I'm talking about a guy that plays and speaks with his pads. That's what Caleb Downs is. It's going to be big for him, Toby, at the combine. He's listed at 6 foot. I have a verified measurement at 5'11", and at the low 5'11", he may come in even at 5'10" at the combine. So that may be big here in his next few months. And you know how scouts get and teams get where it's just one little thing and they can kind of push him off a player. But I wouldn't get too cute with the evaluation of a guy like Caleb Downs, where he really is just a fundamentally elite ball player. This with all due respect, and I've said it before, and that he would be the most talented safety to come into Washington since Sean Taylor years ago. That's saying a lot about what he is, but he is that type of elite ball player.
When you look at the edge rushers, we just mentioned some of the guys. Arvell Reese played some off-ball linebacker, played some edge. Ruben Bain, someone that people get really enamored with. We'll see him in the national championship game. Some of these different guys. David Bailey has been a name that a lot of people are really, really high on. How would you rank those edge rushers?
Yeah, for me, David Bailey is my top edge in this class, Toby. And there is a little bit of a gap between him and Ruben Bain. Now, when you look at Ruben, he is the most powerful rusher in this class. Think about it, a Jared Verse as far as winning through someone's chest plate. And then also as a run defender, he is the most elite, whether it's defensive tackle or defensive end. But the arm length is going to be a little bit of concern against bigger, more athletic tackles, winning in isolation at 5 tech. And David Bailey, and the reason why I have him above Ruben Bain is just the explosiveness, the consistent production against double teams, triple teams at times, the bend. If he's not able to get to the quarterback, you saw the batted passes that he had against Oregon at the line of scrimmage. He could just impact the game in so many ways. Now, I'm not drafting David Bailey at 7 if I'm Adam Peters to back down passes. I'm drafting him to flat out get after Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, and Jackson Dart. That's why his bend, the explosiveness, just the power overall, the pass rush repertoire, the plan, if you will, is really there for me with David Bailey. But if they want to say, hey, look, we're at 7, we want to trade down, we want to add more picks, we only have 6 in this class. I really like R. Mason Thomas from Oklahoma. Josh Josephs is a nice piece from Tennessee. Akeem Mesidor is one of my favorite players in this draft on day 2. We're going to see him at the Senior Bowl and the National Championship. So a lot of guys in this class that can really get after the quarterback. The Commanders need that moving into 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, does that maybe play into some of your thought process? Obviously, they don't have a 2nd-round pick, but they do have a 3rd. Does that play into your process a little bit if you're deciding between, oh, okay, I can go Caleb Downs, who might be the best player overall, or do I need to go edge rusher because I can get David Bailey? If both of those are there, does the seeming depth of the edge rusher class play in at all, or is it just take the best player that you think fits best?
Yeah, I think going BPA is a little bit more of a luxury type of addition. You see, the Chiefs and the Eagles over the last few years do that. I don't think the Commanders are in a spot to just say, hey, add a luxury player or BPA right now, but also that BPA might potentially find into your best fit and what you need right now, which is something that obviously you want to align every single year. So when I look at this edge class, I think I would agree in that question, Toby. And then when I look at guys even behind those guys I just mentioned, whether it's Dennis Sutton that really fits the profile of the archetype of what we've seen the Commanders prioritize last year. But if you're bringing a new defensive coordinator, those body types that you're going to prioritize in free agency in the draft are going to change. And then at the safety group, if you don't grab a Caleb Downs there, do you want to wait until late day 2 to grab a Zakee Wheatley from Penn State or a small school kid that's really rising up draft boards, and Emmanuel McNeil Warren, 6'2", 205-pound safety from Toledo? So those types of guys. So there are players everywhere, Toby, in this class. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, this position group is better than this one or this one's better than this one. If you're Adam Peters and you trust your scouting staff to do their football jobs, there's going to be players up and down this draft board where you can find to come in and be contributors, because bottom line, the Commanders defense specifically needs guys to come in right away and compete if they want to be competitive in the NFC East this fall.
Talking with Ryan Fowler here on the Team 980. Toby Altizer in for Kevin Sheehan. One last on the Commanders. You talked about a trade down potentially. Do you see that really materializing a potential team? Because generally you're thinking if you're going to move up, especially inside the top 10, it's for a quarterback. And I don't know that I feel great about that with this class. Do you see any potential? I mean, I'd thrown around the idea of maybe the Rams getting interested and coming to get their successor to Matt Stafford, but if Dante Moore declares and he's already gone, are they really going to do that for Ty Simpson? Like, do you see there being real possibilities of them being able to trade down?
I think as the months go on, right, I think there's going to be still a lot to be figured out, right? We still have yet to get to the combine, these pre-draft events and stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of conversations had at those separate events. It is a tough spot at 7. I think if there are a couple teams, I definitely would have said the Rams. I think both Miami and Dallas potentially are tricky spots right there, specifically Dallas, not because of the quarterback position, but specifically potentially they really like Carnell Tate. I know that as of right now, if they don't think he can potentially be a guy that gets past Kansas City or behind Miami, that may be a team. But also you're Washington, you're probably not going to trade with Dallas, right, as an in-division rival. But also, you look at Tampa Bay, you look at Baltimore, the situation there with no John Harbaugh up there, their potential draft plan. So I think there's a lot of hypotheticals to throw out right now, but at the end of the day, it is a tricky spot at 7. You'd like to be in that top 3 or 4 or 5 to potentially trade down, but crazier things have happened. I think Adam Peters is going to be doing some maneuvering in April because 6 picks at the bottom line is just flat out not enough with the holes that this roster has.
Completely agree on that. Last thing on the draft, and I want to get your thoughts on the playoffs before we get out of here. Quarterbacks in this draft. Mendoza seems to be the top guy. Pretty likely can pencil him in to be the first overall pick. What are your thoughts on Dante Moore? I thought that after the Rose Bowl that Ty Simpson for sure was going back to Bama, and that didn't end up being the case. I thought, with Dante Moore's performance and his ability to go back to college, I think, there's a likelihood there. But like I said, I thought the same thing about Ty Simpson. He declared. Do you think Moore comes out? And if so, how do you rank these guys? And where does Trinidad Chambliss fit in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Toby. And I think with Oregon, with Dylan Raiola transferring in there, I think Dante Moore is gone. It's not official yet, of course, but I do think he is gone. For me, I think from a talent perspective and what really the NFL has prioritized in the past, he's right alongside Fernando Mendoza for me. There really is no QB1, QB2. It's QB1A, QB1B. Now, I know Fernando, his success at Cal, success at Indiana, what we've seen in the CFP, the Heisman winner of this year, all of that stuff really plays into his evaluation. Projecting him to potentially to the Vegas Raiders, I wish the best for the kid, but there's not a lot of great surroundings there outside of Brock Bowers. I know Ashton Genty's a decent ball player, but they got to improve that front 5. But overall in this quarterback class, Dante Moore is very impressive to me in what he could be at his ceiling. I think he does have the highest ceiling of this class. But then that QB3 conversation is really where this class is going to start for me. Because if Ty declared, even if he did, if he went back to school, there's a situation where Trinidad Chambliss, the denying the 6th year of eligibility, he is lock solid for me, QB3 in this class. And seeing around the league how these coaches and coordinators have prioritized these dual threat skill sets, I'm not saying this is a situation where we see Trinidad Chambliss sneak into the back end of the first round or something and the Pittsburgh Steelers prioritize a guy like him. Crazier things, again, have happened. But QB3, QB4, is that Garrett Nussmeier? Is that John Mateer? What do they do with Carson Beck, Cade Klubnik? Teams still do like Drew Aller, even though it's been ugly at Penn State, big, talented kid. So there's a lot to figure out here in this class, and this is definitely not a year like we've seen years prior, specifically 24. You knew he was going to be at the top, but you don't know who was going to be there outside of Moore and Mendoza as you work into the back of round 1 and into day 2.
Yeah, I tell you what, the more that these drafts go by, more it makes me thankful that Washington got one of those guys in 24. I mean, I'm pretty happy with Jaden Daniels. Last thing before we get you out of here, what do you make of what we saw in Wildcard weekend and who you got going the rest of the way?
Yeah, it was a heck of a weekend, right? It really was a heck of a weekend. It's so different looking at the AFC and the NFC, Toby. I think in the AFC, you got powerful defenses with Denver and Houston, and even what the Jags did, even though in their loss, their defense was all over Josh Allen. And then on the NFC side of things, you got guys that can really score some points, right? With Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Caleb Williams, and the array of weapons he has. Of course, Ben Johnson pressing the buttons there in Chicago. What a heck of a weekend. All close games. The dominance that this Houston defense showed. I can't go into next week saying, hey, Drake May is going to run over them. I think Houston potentially has a shot to get the AFC title game. I'm actually picking them this week against New England. But a team that I think is going to go all the way, their defense has got to show up in some different moments, but it still is the LA Rams. I can't go away from that connection of Stafford and Nacua, the young players they have along the front 7. They got 2 running backs they can go to, veteran tight ends, and a veteran quarterback that really, for me, should be the MVP this year. So if I have to make a pick right now here in mid-January, I'm going to go the LA Rams to make it all the way.
Appreciate the time, Ryan. Always great.
Of course. Thanks as always, Toby.
That's Ryan Fowler. He joined us from Fansided. Always great to listen to him. He's got so much analysis. Obviously spent time here in DC covering the Commanders, but also does a great job with draft stuff. So as you get closer to the NFL draft and want to know what's going on in the Senior Bowl, make sure you give Ryan Fowler a follow. Want to talk about the defensive coordinator position. Commanders going to interview or want to interview Brian Flores. How interested are you in Brian Flores? We'll take a look at some of the other defensive coordinator candidates for Washington as well. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan today on the Kevin Sheehan Show. The Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. I'll be back tomorrow. Make sure you check out the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Odyssey app, also on the Team 980 YouTube page as well, and on Twitter right now, or excuse me, X, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to continue calling it Twitter.
It's Twitter.
It's Twitter forever, as far as I'm concerned, because X just doesn't flow.
No.
I still don't know what X is.
You're not supposed to, and that's the whole point. That's why it's Twitter.
Forever Twitter. Check out the poll of the day driven by Waldorf Honda. It all starts with a click, waldorfhonda.com. If you go to the Team 980's Twitter, Commanders are reportedly interested in Brian Flores as their next defensive coordinator. What's your interest level? So far, the results higher immediately is 64%, very interested, 26%, keep options open about 6%, no thank you about 4%. So I would say a majority of people are saying, let's go get this guy.
All knowers.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a whole lot to debate here.
No, I don't think there is either.
He's one of the top defensive coordinators in the sport.
Yeah, easily.
And I completely agree with Ryan Fowler's take on this. I don't like passive defensive football.
No, it doesn't get you anywhere.
If I'm going to go down, let's be aggressive.
We're going to swing.
Let's force the issue. And I thought when they got Dan Quinn and Joe Witt that they were going to play a more aggressive style. Now, part of it is I don't know that they've had the dudes to do it, to exactly do what they wanted to do. And part of what Dan Quinn's defense had in Dallas was Micah Parsons, which allows you to wreck game plans without having to be as aggressive. They didn't have that here. But I need to see somebody. One, I want to see a defensive coordinator outside of the Dan Quinn tree. I want to see a different type of defense than what Dan Quinn has been running. And secondly, I want to see somebody that's going to force the issue. I want to see somebody that's going to be aggressive. This idea in the modern NFL that you just have to sit back and take it and then finally decide to play defense in the red zone, that's all you can do because all the rules, is just false. Watch Houston last night. And I know that Pittsburgh is severely limited on offense. I understand that. But watch Houston last night. They are getting after the quarterback. Part of that is they have elite edge rushers, but they are swarming the football. They're doing everything that I want to see a defense do. And you watch the Vikings play football on the defensive side with Brian Flores, and they say, screw it. We're going to put everybody up the line of scrimmage. We're either going to drop 8 or we're going to bring everybody. There's no in between. I kind of applaud that because I'm that kind of a guy. I was telling Drab this a couple of days ago with chairs and different things. I'm an extreme guy. It's kind of funny because when I think about what I do, I'm a little quirky in this way. Like a couple of, I forget what day it was. Maybe it was New Year's Day. Nick Ashew was in, and he was sitting in the chair after I was, and he was complaining that I had it all the way to the floor. Ben Strober was complaining about the same thing. Chris Russell, a couple of after. The
you're gonna have to swap chairs before he gets here.
100%. But final game of the season, I done the Burgundy and Gold post game show with Doc the day before, and he comes in, he goes, "Who the heck was sitting here? It's so low." I'm that kind of guy that when I use a chair or something, it's either going to be all the way to the floor or all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how I am. So I generally am not going to sit on the floor because I have short legs because I'm not very tall. But that's kind of how Brian Flores calls defense, by the way. It's either I'm playing all-out coverage or I'm bringing everybody. And I love that. I love it. They have no idea what's coming. Heck, sometimes I'm not even sure if they know what they're doing on defense. It's either
doesn't seem like it.
It's crazy to see how he plays defense in the modern NFL, and I love that. Let's force the issue. Let's make it difficult on the quarterback. Let's make him have to think at the line of scrimmage. Let's make him have to diagnose things. And so I would be fired up if they could get Brian Flores. And he immediately jumps to the top of my list because I want to go through some of these other guys that they potentially could interview. Jonathan Gannon is going to be coming in for an interview later this week. He's someone that I'd be interested in. Patrick Graham from the Raiders is someone that's been interviewed already, I believe, or is going to interview. Jim Schwartz could potentially be available. We'll see what happens there. He's the Browns defensive coordinator. Apparently, whoever they bring in as head coach, they want to recommend that he stays. Same thing with Jeff Ulbrich in Atlanta. The Falcons blocked the Cowboys from interviewing him for their defensive coordinator job because Arthur Blank wants to recommend him to the new head coach to keep him as a DC. Raheem Morris is interesting. The ties to Dan Quinn, the relationship there, like I already said, though, I think I would move off of the Dan Quinn style. So I don't know if I'm as interested in Raheem Morris as I was initially when his name became available. Al Harris, similar kind of thing, but he's a good coach. I remember him his playing days in Green Bay. Was a heck of a player. He seems to always create turnover, so that'd be interesting. And then they just interviewed Chiefs D-line coach Joe Cullen. I don't know a whole lot about him, so I'm not as interested there. But when you hear the name Brian Flores and potentially coming here, I think that changes a lot for you, because I think that could change the way that the team dynamic works, where especially with a young coordinator on the offensive side of the ball, where David Blau's really having to fill big shoes. Not that he's necessarily filling big shoes from Cliff Kingsbury leaving, but just being an OC in the National Football League is a big responsibility. It's a big role that he has to fill. If you can bring in a seasoned defensive coordinator, someone that can go do things their own way, one, Dan Quinn's a defensive guy, but he can at least help on the offensive side of the ball with David Blau in the transition to becoming an offensive coordinator, just with some of the coaching stuff, with the day-to-day, just being able to help handle some of their responsibility. Because going from assistant quarterback coach to now the offensive coordinator, on top of the fact that he's just started coaching, this will be his third year being a coach, and he's going to be the offensive coordinator. That's a lot of responsibility to throw on someone. I heard Kevin talking with Ben Standing about this yesterday, about bringing in someone as like a senior offensive assistant. I think that'll help as well, but alleviating a little bit of the stuff from Dan Quinn so that he can help a little bit on that offensive side, just to, again, take a little bit off of the plate of David Blau, where he's stepping into a role that he's maybe not fully prepared for. Maybe he is, I don't know. But everyone speaks really highly of how smart he is, but it's a lot to throw on his plate. Just at least allowing someone on the defensive side to step in and be able to run things, I think would be very, very helpful. And two, on top of that, not just running things, but if you could find a way, and they would have to spend significant resources, one, on the D coordinator. If they're going after Brian Flores, that means they're cutting a big check for their D coordinator. But two, you have to spend significant resources to bring in the personnel necessary to run Brian Flores' defense. But if you can get to a point where the defense can actually fend for itself, and God forbid they be a strength, like they actually create turnovers, they actually make it difficult for the offense of the other team to move the football, they actually limit points scored, they don't bust coverages all the time. Like if that can happen and the offense has a little bit of time to grow, because I do think there's going to be some growing pains on that side of the football. So the thing that worries me, and frankly a little bit why I'm still skeptical about the David Blau hire, is what are the expectations for next year? Realistically, what are your expectations? If you're saying, oh, it's kind of a rebuilding year and they're just growing and, they win 7 games, we're all good. Okay, then I don't have much of an issue with the David Blau hire. I don't think you go to the NFC Championship game last year. I know this year was really, really bad, but I don't think your expectations are just suddenly, yeah, we'll marginally improve from our 5 wins this year. I think you got pretty decently high expectation, at least to be sniffing the playoffs. If that's the case, I don't have as much time to just let the offense build into something. It's got to be decent from the stretch and then get better. It can't just be garbage and then eventually get to a point mid-season where it's acceptable. To me, it's got to start at an acceptable level and then grow to a point where you see some of that stardom and what people are thinking about David Blau grow as the season goes on, to the point, okay, now I kind of see it. It can't be, oh, this is not acceptable weeks 1 through 4 and weeks 1 through 5, and all of a sudden now it's starting to grow. I don't think you can have as much patience there. But one thing that can help that is if you can have a defense that can stand on its own 2 feet. If you can have a defense that can go out there and play at a level that creates turnovers and is able to play at a really high level that they're a top 15 unit in the league, then suddenly there's not as much pressure on the offense right away. And there's not as much pressure on Jaden Daniels to try to do too much. There's not as much pressure on David Blau to have a top 5 unit right away. Like those sorts of things allows them a little more time to grow, versus say you come out next year and you have expectations of getting in the playoffs. If the defense plays at the same level it did this year, then there's even more pressure on David Blau and the offense to get things going maybe a little bit sooner than's realistic. So I think getting a veteran defensive coordinator that knows what they're doing, has recently run a defense that is very aggressive and has been very good and successful in this league, I think would be huge for what you're trying to do here in DC, and could help you potentially propel you to something better than maybe realistically would have expected not that long ago for this team going into next year, because it could change that outlook of that side of the football. Because I don't feel great about next year's defense. Matter of fact, as the season was wrapping up, one of the things I talked about over the holidays was, what are you confident in going into next season? And I was trying to be positive to switch it up because so much had been negative about this season. But one of the main things that made me still feel not very good was there were only two things that made me feel positive about next year. Only two things that made me feel confident about next season. Both of them were on offense, and one was Jaden and the other was the offensive line. Go ahead and try to find me something about the defense that makes you think, okay, I feel pretty confident going into next year. Good luck. I feel good about Trey Amos, but I felt good about Mikey Sanders still going into year 2, and that didn't go very well. So I got to see it again with Trey Amos. I like Frankie Louvu, question mark, because year 1 was awesome. Year 2 was mediocre at best. I don't feel great about the linebacker play. Edge rusher is still a major question mark outside of Dorrance Armstrong coming back. He was really, really good this year, but even so, Dorrance Armstrong as a 1 is not very good. As a 2 or a 3, we can have a different discussion. Defensive tackle, are they going to move off Deron Payne? Javon Kinlaw, even though everybody keeps trying to tell me he didn't even finish with a sack. I know defensive tackles, you generally don't judge off of sacks, but my gosh, 0? He played every game. You couldn't accidentally touch a guy for a half sack? That's bad. Kinlaw is okay. Like, I'm not saying he's just the worst player on the team, but he's okay. Johnny Newton, I'd love for him to show up in a game other than on Christmas Day. I guess if he plays the Cowboys, maybe he's good. Maybe if he only plays on Christmas, he'd be good. But Johnny Newton hasn't done a whole lot. The secondary is a big question outside of what you've got with Sanders still and Amos. And like I said, Amos I feel good about. Sanders still's a question after what you saw this year. Safety's a question after what we saw from Quan Martin this year. So good luck finding some positives about the defense, by the way. And that also speaks to, if you want to bring in Brian Flores, well, hiring Brian Flores doesn't immediately fix everything on the defense. You have to get some talent on that side of the football. And that's where this offseason becomes really difficult for Adam Peters. And I don't envy his job, because you look at what they have to do. They need playmakers on offense. I think their O-line is set. They're set at quarterback. They need tight ends. They need a lot of stuff this offseason. I would say 75% of it is probably on the defensive side of the football. But it's a good and a bad point for their defense. The good point is, you take Caleb Downs, you can build your defense around Caleb Downs because you don't have anything to build your defense around. The bad part is, you probably have some playoff expectations and you have no cornerstones on the defense right now. That's a problem. So there's good and bad there. Adam Peters can kind of go wherever he wants with the defense this offseason, but he's going to have to spend a lot on the defense. Like, if they did a whole draft where they drafted everything on defense, I don't think it'd be crazy, and there'd still be holes. There'd still be a lot of stuff. 1, because they don't have the picks. 2, because they have to fill the entire defense, essentially. You want Bobby Wagner back playing linebacker? I'm good. I like what he means for leadership. Obviously, him and Jaden are close, and him and a lot of the guys in that locker room are close. That's great. If you bring him back and he's only playing first down or obvious rundowns, he's coming in at the goal line, maybe it's a little bit of a different scenario, but I don't know. I'm probably good there. What are you going to do at edge rusher? Are you going to draft the guy at 7 and then still have to figure out what you're going to do at safety if you don't take Caleb Downs? Or, if you trade back, could you maybe get a Sonny Styles there at linebacker? Or what are – there's so many questions to figure out on that defensive side of the football. So I want to continue talking about these D coordinator candidates. 301-230-098 if you'd like to hop in. Also, make sure you check out the poll of the day on the Team 980's Twitter. How interested are you in Brian Flores? Who's your top candidate? And what's your priority list for the defense? Because that's the tough part for me. If you want to hire one of these guys, I think you can see an improved defense. You'll have a better scheme. I'll like a lot of those things. But if you gave Brian Flores the defense that DQ and Joe Witt had to work with this season, I think the unit would have been better. I don't think it would have been spectacular. I don't think it would have been world-beating. I don't think it would have been something that we're talking about this season a whole lot differently. Well, what do you want to see? What do you want to see as the Commanders DC 301-230-0980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan. We'll get to your phone calls and more reaction about the Brian Flores defensive coordinator stuff. And what do we want to see on the defensive side of the football next?
All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. Here's what's happening. We start off with the dominant defensive performance from the Houston Texans last night as they beat the crap out of the Pittsburgh Steelers 30-6, including 2 defensive touchdowns from one of the best units in football. The divisional round is now set. So here's the slate for this weekend. Saturday, we get the Bills facing the Broncos in Denver. That'll be at 4:30 on CBS. The Niners, they take on the Seahawks. That'll be 8 p.m. Saturday night. And Sunday, Texans, they travel to Foxborough to take on the Pats at 3 p.m. And the Rams move up to Chicago to take on the Bears at 6:30. That'll be on NBC. Plus, according to Ian Rappaport, the Commanders are interested in interviewing Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores for their open position. Flores' contract with Minnesota is up, and he's able to pursue other similar roles around the NFL. Plus, the Commanders have also requested to interview Falcons assistant and son of Doug Williams, DJ Williams, for their quarterback coach position. Also in the running is Panthers assistant quarterback coach Mike Bercovici, who also crossed paths with Jaden Daniels at Arizona State in 2019. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command throughout all of this offseason. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
It is the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. He'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Right now, though, talking about Commanders' defensive coordinator candidates. We just found out a new one a little bit earlier today from Ian Rappaport. Brian Flores could potentially be a candidate. Rappaport reporting at 10:30 today that the Commanders are hoping to interview Brian Flores for their DC job. What do you want to see at defensive coordinator? 301-230-0980 if you'd like to hop in, or what are some priorities? What are some things you want to see from the defense this offseason? What do you want to see them improve? Let's get out to Ross in Tampa. Ross, what's going on?
What's going on, Toby? First question for you. How's the vibes in Blacksburg, man? How them Hokies doing the next year?
I'm hoping they're going to get rolling. I feel pretty good. I think a lot of people feel pretty positive, and basketball team's playing well, so I think vibe's pretty high.
Man, that was my dream school like 20 years ago, back during the Marcus Vick era, man. It was a good time, man. I'm hoping James Franklin can pull it off. But let's push a little bit further east out in D.C., man. So, I was asking Max. I didn't know Brian Flores would be available, because at first it was going to be, man, give me Jim Schwartz. Like I said, yes. I want that old school, multi-time head coach, D.C., like, okay, head coach ain't really his thing. Let me get a defensive-minded guy at the coordinator position where we didn't got to worry about losing, like a Spagnuolo in Kansas City or a Vic Fangio in Philly, where he can just sit in that booth and do his thing. And, like I say, he might get an interview, but we know they ain't going to bring him in for like a third head coaching job. But if you're telling me Washington's able to convince Brian Flores to leave his current situation in Minnesota to come out to D.C. to coach whatever this defense is going to make itself up with, man, come on. I'll take Brian Flores. But if not him, give me Schwartz. I just want a veteran DC who's been proven. If they hire somebody who I've never heard of, man, I just hope that Dan Quinn's ass and his ears are wired on the same page, or his time might be up after next season, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, Ross. Yeah, I think, to me, I agree with him. Brian Flores would now be the top candidate for me. Jim Schwartz would be number 2. If you're going after that, Jeff Ulbricht's probably number 3, and then Patrick Graham, maybe Jonathan Gannon somewhere. That's my top 5. But I would be happy with just about any of those guys. But now that you have the opportunity for Flores, absolutely. I think you got to do everything you possibly can. If he turns you down, that's fine. But throw everything. Go as hard as you can to make sure you try to get him. Larry is in La Plata. Larry, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm jumping on the Jim Schwartz bandwagon, Toby. I mean, look at his resume. All he does is vastly improve the defenses wherever he goes. The question I guess you need to ask is, after all the turmoil in Miami with Brian Flores, why is he now available again in Minnesota after the job he did there? That's got to be screaming alarm bells to me. Is he, I don't know. Why is he available?
So I think the big thing,
Minnesota snatching him up.
So I think the thing for Brian Flores, appreciate the phone call. I think for Brian Flores, it's just his contract is up. I don't think there's any ill will in Minnesota. I don't think there's anything going on there in terms of that. He referenced the Miami days, which we saw how that went. There have been lawsuits, all that stuff going on with Brian Flores. Like he's definitely a strong-willed individual, which is fine. I kind of like that out of a D coordinator. I don't think that there's any problems in Minnesota. I think it's truly just his contract is up, and it very well may be that he just goes back to Minnesota and is back there again. But with his contract being up and they didn't get something done beforehand, it opens up the opportunity that other teams can talk to him. So I think that's part of what it is. And I think part of the other thing with Jim Schwartz, I haven't seen him get interviewed for defensive coordinator jobs because he's technically still the Browns D coordinator. He's going to get interviewed for a head coaching job. I don't know that he'll get that. But I think if he gets let go, then he becomes right there with Brian Flores for me, like I said, and Jeff Ulbrich as well. Both those guys are technically still with their jobs. And from what has been reported, their general managers or owners or whoever is going to recommend that they keep those guys, which, heck, I would love to see, if I'm a new head coach stepping in and I can just let Jim Schwartz handle the defense if I'm in Cleveland. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see if those guys even truly become available. But I agree. If you can get him, that'd be great. But the Flores stuff, I think, is more so just his contract ran out. So we'll see if they get something done in Minnesota, but I'd love to see him come here to D.C. Lap is in D.C. Lap, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, man? I take any of them coordinators, man. Somebody that's proven, like the last caller we had. Somebody that knows what they're doing. You know, because Dan Quinn shouldn't have to call defenses, man. It's crazy if he's a head coach. And if we're not going to get any, like, big-time playmakers like a Myles Garrett type, then the defense has to play as a unit. If you see, like, you know, Drake May and Bo Nix and certain other, C.J. Stroud, they got good defenses. We need that for Jaden to really be balling for real. You know what I'm saying? Where he can make mistakes, still play his game. If we got a solid defense that'll keep us in a lot of games, keep us competitive, with still a chance to win. So hopefully they get it right, man, and don't make a mistake, man. But we'll see what happens, man. It's crazy.
Appreciate it, Lap. Yeah, I think, you know, it's tough for me because with the Dan Quinn stuff of him calling plays, and I've said this before, it's a little bit crazy to me where we got to where you fired both coordinators or quote unquote mutually agreed to part ways with Cliff Kingsbury. Is that how we're phrasing it? You fired both coordinators and you had a coach that he wasn't coming out on the record saying, I want to call plays again, and I want to be the guy that's in charge of the defense. And that's fine because we've seen it with other coaches. They can kind of struggle with some of the game management stuff, which I still question. Okay, Dan, you don't call plays or have called plays, and you still struggle. When you have called the plays to finish the year, you struggle with timeouts. Before you called the plays, you struggle with timeouts. But I understand if a head coach doesn't want to call plays. But if he's not calling plays and you just fired both coordinators, why did you not seriously evaluate the head coach? I do question that a little bit, but since he's not going to, I'd love to get somebody that's a little bit different than Dan Quinn. Don't get the same type of defense. Go get somebody that can run their own defense, can bring something new, and potentially, like we talked about, a little more attacking, a little more old school. Let's go after these guys. Let's force the issue. Now, you got to have the people to do it, and that's going to be a big question as well. Let's get out to Little. Little, what's going on?
Kobe, undisputed youngest in charge.
Yes, sir.
Shout out to Mad Max. Hey, look, man, I'm going to tell you now, that coordinator, he's been a sponge for about 5 years, Toby. He's been saturating all that knowledge from that boy Ben Johnson and any other coordinator that he was around. So I got a lot of confidence in him mixing it up, doing his own thing as a young innovator. Now, let me say this. Brian Flores is all shaping up. If we get him, Toby, we going after Hunter. You know, Hunter played up under him in Minnesota, and Hunter free agent this year. Break the bank for Hunter, man. That's how I look at it, Toby. God bless you. Stay up, big fella. Hey, but look, I'm trying to tell you, it's shaping up. If we get Hunter, I'm almost guaranteed we're going to get that. I mean, we get Flores, I'm almost guaranteed we're going to get Hunter. What you think about that, man?
Appreciate it, Little.
My man.
Yeah, he's talking about Danielle Hunter. And the interesting part about Danielle Hunter is he kind of would fit right into the thing that so many people are saying don't do. He's 31. He'd turn 32 late October next year. At the same point, dude dominated this year, had 15 sacks. So it's like, you know, it's not the same as like the Bobby Wagner or the Zach Ertz where we're like, well, I don't know what you're going to get. And then they kind of wowed. If you got Danielle Hunter, he's coming off a 15-sack season, which, by the way, he's going to be expensive if that's the case. I'm just curious to know what they're going to do. If they get Brian Flores, how are they going to get his guys? Because he likes to run a unique style of defense. How are you going to get his guys that can – because you really need a bunch of dudes that are not necessarily hybrid players, but guys that can do a lot of stuff because they're going to blitz. You're going to ask guys that are playing on the edge to drop into coverage and be able to do those sorts of things. That's why I brought up Arvell Reese as a potential candidate, is he plays a lot of off-ball linebacker for Ohio State, but a lot of people think he's just going to end up being an edge rusher in the pros. I'd be very interested, though, if you could get a bunch of guys that could fit. I mean, yeah, if you turn things around and then you give David Blau some time to grow into that position, I think it's the best case scenario for this team going forward, is to have an experienced defensive coordinator that could bring a good defense here and call his own stuff and allow David Blau kind of to grow into the role. And if he's as bright as everyone talks about over in the building over there, then hopefully by mid-season next year, you're starting to see some of that difference, and hopefully earlier than that. But I do think it's going to take a little bit of time and some patience. I want to talk about David Blau next because Ben Standig was on with Kevin Sheehan yesterday and had brought up the idea, or Kevin asked him about the idea of the hiring process and whether there are any other real candidates. And Ben Standig basically had said no. So I want to hear that clip again. Also want to get your thoughts on the hiring process. Did you have a problem with the way that they went about it, where they essentially said, yeah, we're going to go through the whole process because it's necessary for the rules, but then we're just going to hire David Blau. Do you have an issue with the hiring process for David Blau? 301-230-0980. You can chime in. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan.
4 guys interviewed, 3 internal, 2 external. Is it your sense that none of those people had a chance, that it was Blau all along, or was there a McDaniel wild card that they still entertained up until late last week?
Yeah. To your point of did any of those other people have a real shot? I mean, I don't think so, would be my guess. I don't know this for fact. The 2 candidates from outside of here, one guy from Dallas that Quinn obviously would know, and then Drew Torello was here. Like, I don't know that we're not seeing those guys mentioned on anybody else's supposed offensive coordinator list, so that seems probably unlikely. Brian Johnson, I think if we had gone back to the beginning of the season and just said, hey, Cliff is going to leave to take another job or something, who's next in line if they're going to hire internally? And I think the logical answer would have been Brian Johnson, because he's been a coordinator. He was brought in to be a passing game coordinator and assistant head coach with Quinn. He's experienced. David Blau, not experienced. So that would have been the one thought. So maybe that was the other possibility. But, if you're going to go with Blau, you probably had to figure that you probably had a sense about this, for some time. And obviously, they're going for the upside, and maybe that's the way to go. We've seen other, young coaches come through over time, and, we've had these discussions, and, you're taking a big flyer. He's never, he's never done the thing that he's going to have to do. He's never even been the position coach before as the lead guy. I mean, I guess he technically sort of was the last few weeks here, but not really. So, that's a huge leap. But, if you're going to get ahead and say, hey, this guy's got so much upside, we think this is worth the risk, then, then that's kind of how they're here. And I think if you're going to even contemplate that to the degree that they clearly were, you kind of have to be bought in that one pretty quick, unless he just absolutely blows an interview, which would seem unlikely since they already know them.
Kevin Sheehan Show. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin today. That clip from yesterday, Kevin Sheehan with Ben Standig talking about the David Blau hiring process. Make sure you check out the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980 on the Odyssey app. Make sure you check it out on the YouTube page as well. And check out the poll of the day driven by Waldorf Honda. It all starts with a click, waldorfhonda.com. Check that out on the Team 980's Twitter. Asking about the D coordinator position. Should Washington be going heavily after Brian Flores as the D coordinator? Right now, though, talking about the offensive coordinator position, David Blau hired Friday evening. And look, I was first on the air about this, reacting to this Friday evening over on the Fan. Just thinking about the process to get David Blau, I think plays into this a little bit, and maybe is a little bit why I'm skeptical here. What we've heard about this, and you just heard it from Ben Standig. So they brought in 2 external candidates, Drew Terrell, Lunda Wells. Neither one was realistically a candidate to get this job. They interviewed guys inside the building, seemingly Anthony Lynn, David Blau, obviously one of them, Brian Johnson, and then they go with David Blau. I wonder where in the pecking order he was with like a Tavita Pritchard, if they would have gone with Blau over Pritchard if he were still here. Regardless, they go with David Blau, and I think part of the reason I'm a little skeptical here is this seems a little bit quick and maybe not checking all the avenues that you should. And I'm still skeptical that it's all going to work. I understand all the reasons why everybody lays out why it's a positive move, and I hope I'm the idiot. I hope I'm the guy that everyone looks back and says, remember when that Toby moron was filling in for Sheehan and said that it wasn't a good hire to go with David Blau? I hope that's what everybody's saying, because I truly hope that it all works out. I'm just a little bit skeptical that you hired a guy who was an assistant quarterbacks coach, who hasn't called plays, who hasn't run an offense, and is expected to step into a very critical year 3 for Dan Quinn, year 3 for Jaden Daniels, and it might not go well. The pros of it, though, would be that continuity with Jaden. That is a big thing. That is something that is massive for a quarterback in his development. Now, I would argue that it's not as big as just making sure you get the correct guy. They deem David Blau to be the correct guy. But one of the things that scares me a little bit on this is sometimes sometimes you feel like you're trying to learn from a mistake and you're trying to learn from your past, and you go so far into that you kind of miss the fact that it's not apples to apples, the comparisons that you're going with. Because what I've seen so many people say about this hire is, well, remember when Washington had McVay? Remember when they had Shanahan? Remember when they had LaFleur? Remember when they had McDaniel and none of those guys are here? One, I would say to that, the only two guys that were young, up-and-coming offensive minds that I'm mad left the building, and I'm mad didn't end up becoming the head coach here, would be Sean McVay and Kevin O'Connell. And Kevin O'Connell wasn't really a part of that regime. But the Sean McVay thing, I would have moved on from Jay and promoted McVay. That's what I would have done. But obviously that's hindsight. But I still would have done that at the time. Who knows if McVay has the same success with a meddling owner, with questions at GM and all those sorts of things. So who knows? It probably worked out better for McVay anyways. The other one would have been Kevin O'Connell, like I said. I don't know what the heck Ron was thinking when he stepped in here and moved on from Kevin O'Connell immediately for Scott Turner. I thought that was stupid when it happened, and look how that's turned out. He looks like one of the best coaches in the league. So those are the only two guys. So people that come at me with that one, like, weren't you complaining? No. I'm not complaining about those guys leaving, because I don't know that all those guys were qualified at that point to get to where they're at right now. And that's what I'm a little bit worried about with David Blau. In 5 years, would David Blau be the best candidate for this job? And would we look at him as the new Sean McVay? Maybe. Very possible. And are they getting ahead of the trend here? Very possibly. I'm just a little bit worried that this might be a little bit too soon. Might be a little bit too much to throw on his plate. I hope I'm wrong. But I'm just a little bit worried that with the way that this hiring process went as well, you didn't really go after anybody. It seemingly was, Cliff's gone, Blau's the OC. And they had to fulfill the necessary interviews and stuff to accommodate the NFL's rules. Once they did that, though, they're like, okay, it's David Blau. Now, we'll see what happens. It doesn't sound like Matt LaFleur is going to be let go in Green Bay. Mike McDaniel, we'll see what happens with him. But part of my issue with this was how quickly they moved, that you didn't even leave open the opportunity for some of these other candidates. And Grant had said yesterday that he had heard that they hadn't even reached out to McDaniel in at least formal capacity, through an agent to set up an interview. Maybe Dan Quinn had texted Mike McDaniel, was like, hey, interested? And maybe he's like, probably somewhere else. And that maybe is the end of that conversation. So who knows? And we'll never, fully understand, probably hear that. But I just think it's at least a little bit interesting that they decided that they were going with David Blau, no question. Now, there is something to be said that they acted with conviction.
For sure.
Like, at least they said, we want David Blau, and they went and got David Blau. They didn't bother. Now, the thing I worry, though, about this is there are two things. Like I said, the experience thing of Dan Quinn saying, well, I can't let what happened to me in Atlanta, where I let go, the coordinators left, and I didn't backfill with my own guys that were ready. I can't let that happen again.
Yeah.
This isn't apples to apples, right? Cliff Kingsbury didn't leave for another job. You moved on from him. Kyle left for another job. That's a little different. And two, it'd be one thing if you promoted Brian Johnson, who had been an OC. It'd be one thing if you promoted Tavita Pritchard, who was a position coach. That is a normal succession plan. To go from assistant quarterback coach to now OC, it's just a little bit hasty. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think just going, well, we can't let the guy out the building. I understand that you think he's really bright, because immediately then people go, well, he was going to potentially go to work with the Lions. And I get that. I get that you don't want to lose him to the Lions, but it's a little bit different of him going to the Lions versus staying here. Because here, he's working with a defensive head coach. So let's just say it goes sideways. What happens? What's the contingency plan? Now, this is also something that Ben Standing was on with Kevin Sheehan yesterday brought up. They're going to have to get a senior offensive analyst or a quarterback coach or an offensive line coach that has a lot more experience to help out in this process. And so seemingly that would be your answer, where if everything goes south, they can turn to said guy and say, okay, can you help him out? Can you maybe call the plays, whatever it may be?
Well, I mean, that's why we got Brian Johnson, Anthony Lynn, a bunch of guys on the staff with a ton of experience too, that he's gonna be able to lean on, that he's already had experience with over the past couple of years.
But that's what I'm curious about. If you're Brian Johnson, you sticking around after you just got passed up?
How willing are you?
Anthony Lynn, I think, would be more willing because I don't think he
I don't think he wants to be a head coach right now.
Well, and I don't think he's going to get a head coach. I don't think he's going to get no coordinator position anywhere.
Yeah.
So maybe he just says, screw it. I'll just stay where I'm comfy and, I have some familiarity and work with these guys. So maybe Anthony Lynn is that guy. But it wouldn't surprise me if Brian Johnson's like, well, what the heck? Like, I had a stint in Philly. It didn't work out. But I came here thinking maybe there's a chance and I get passed over for this guy. So who knows? If Brian Johnson stays, then he could be another one. But if he would have gone to Detroit, right? If David Blau had gone to Detroit, then Dan Campbell could do the same thing that he did this year if things went really, really poorly. He obviously wouldn't want that to be the case, but you'd be working with an offensive head coach. I just think that going through this hiring process and getting to the point where it wasn't even a full week after the season ended and saying, this is our OC without evaluating any other real options other than David Blau is a bit of a mistake. And I hope I'm the idiot here and that they just got the next Sean McVay and that they just hired the boy genius. But I just don't think it's that easy to go from being the assistant quarterbacks coach to the offensive coordinator and build your own system, come up with your own terminology, command an entire room, game plan, scheme, call plays, all in your third year as a coach. It's just his third year as a coach. I'm just a little hesitant. What do you think, Max? Were you a fan of this hire?
So when you look at the history of this franchise and all of the coaches that we've let out the door, why not keep one around at least for a little bit, especially when he's had as much experience under a lot of like very successful offensive minds that are currently head coaches or being interviewed for head coaching jobs. I think David Blau's learned a lot, and I remember at the beginning of his tenure, he famously learned the playbook in very quickly and started developing concepts off of that. So I'm excited to see what he's cooking there. I'm a fan right now. I obviously, we'll see how it goes, but with how respected I have heard that he is throughout league circles, I'm a fan of the hire and am excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely going to be the case. I mean, like Kevin said yesterday, it's kind of tough because we're all working off of the same premise here.
Yeah.
It's not something where, you have film that I don't have.
Right.
Or you have some people, obviously, that are over there pretty often and have had conversations, have a little more of a relationship than what we do, obviously. But it's not like someone else has more information than we do.
Yeah.
We're all kind of working back from the same thing. What did you hear about him from Dan Quinn? What have you heard about him from Cliff Kingsbury? What have you heard about him throughout league circles, like you mentioned? And everybody says the same thing. He's bright. He's great. Well, no duh.
Yeah, you got to be bright.
You don't end up in that spot without it. Like we talk about with the Nationals things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paul Taboni gets his job when he's mid-30s as the president of baseball operations. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, up-and-comer, great. Well, duh. Someone that age doesn't get that position unless they are.
Sure.
Right? So I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
And you hear some of the stuff. Yeah, absolutely. You hear the touchdown play that was the nail in the coffin, the game-winning touchdown against Philly in the second game last year. That was a David Blau idea. Great. There were some other plays that were put in that worked, that were David Blau ideas. Great. Of course that's going to happen. Otherwise, he doesn't get the job. So I understand all those things. And he is bright. And I believe all those things. I'm not contradicting and saying, no, I don't believe those reports. I do believe those reports. I think he is smart. I just question if the guy that's able to draw up the one play from time to time, that throws in the suggestion from time to time, where realistically, when you think of an offensive game plan, like when you think of who's in charge of the offense and the totem pole there, offensive coordinator, if you have a defensive head coach like Washington does, offensive coordinator's number one. After that, it's probably pass game, run game coordinators.
Something like that, yeah.
And then you're going to position coaches, and then you're going to assistant position coaches. So he's going from 4 to 1. I guess you could say he stepped up to 3 as a position coach when Tavita Pritchard left, although I believe that's a Rooney Rule hire quarterback coach. So that's part of why he never officially got the quarterback coach
The
promotion, even though he served as it for basically a month or so. But it's still a big jump. And for him to handle all these responsibilities, I'm not doubting his ability to be a smart offensive mind. I just question if going with that guy without even considering anyone else is a little bit hasty. You know, if you'd gone through and McDaniel said, sorry, I'm going to go somewhere else, fine. If you would have gone around and look, would I take David Blau over the Darrell Bevels of the world? Yes. I'll take my chances. So if that's what they were going to go with, then fine. Let's go ahead and roll with David Blau. But I just question if you shouldn't have run a little more thorough process before you get to the conclusion of David Blau as the offensive coordinator. 301-230-098 if you'd like to hop in. Do you have an issue with the hiring process of David Blau? Basically, Ben Standing was on with Kevin yesterday. Basically said, I can't confirm it for sure, but it sure feels like they did the necessary steps that are required by the rules, but it was David Blau all along. I just don't feel great about that. I don't. And I think you ask yourself a couple of questions off of this. I want to ask this one next about the patience level. But where do you see this ending? What is the end here for David Blau? Because I think that can answer a lot of your questions and where you feel this thing is going and can kind of speak to how you feel about things. Do you think that this ends with him eventually becoming a head coach somewhere else? Do you think that this ends with it not working well and they have to move off of him? Do you think it ends with him continuing to make the rise up as an offensive coordinator, maybe take over as a head coach here? Like, if that's how you feel and you think that they just found their next head coach of sorts or they found the next guy, then that's fine. I just still think it's a little bit hasty because realistically, I think the other question is, what are the expectations for this year? Because if your expectations are, let's grow off of this year. We're not really looking at what happened in 24 anymore. That was a fun year. That was an incredible ride. But we have to be realistic about where the roster is, where our coaches are, where we're at in terms of where we're at in our program and building towards getting back to that point and even further. If you're looking at it and saying, okay, let's improve off of this year, but we're not trying to get to the standard of what we set in our first year, then yeah, Blau helping the team get to 7-8 wins, improve as the year goes on, show that he can be the guy going forward, show some of those really bright qualities, but understanding there's going to be growing pains, then fine. Yeah. If you're going in with the expectation that this team needs to win 10 games and get into the playoffs for the head coach to keep his job, then I have another question as to what you're doing here. So I think those sorts of things have to work in tandem. And now with the defensive coordinator hire, I do think that you can help yourself out here a little bit and buy yourself some time on the offensive side of the ball. Or if you get a defense that can be a difference-making defense, that can give you some short fields by forcing turnovers, that isn't giving up 30 a game, and you just realistically need to be able to put up a couple of touchdowns, a couple of field goals, get me to 20, 21, 24 points a game, you're going to want more than that, obviously. But at least try to get there and not have to feel like I have to outscore everybody. Then, yeah, maybe it feels a little bit different. But I just think it's a little bit hasty on the hiring process going here. But if you feel like this is just them saying, let's get ahead of things, you know, again, similarly to this feels right out of the Nationals playbook with what they did this offseason, where they went and got a guy in Paul Taboni. They went and got a guy in Blake Butera. They've gotten a lot of young guys on their entire staff. And it's something where people are like, yeah, maybe it's a little bit early, but they were likely going to be in that chair a few years down the line. Is it something where you go, you know what? I think that David Blau was going to be in the offensive coordinator chair somewhere. He was going to have that headset on somewhere in as early as next offseason. So then we're just a year early. And if that's the case, then maybe they are. But I do think that experience matters at the offensive coordinator position. Being able to work on your play calling so that, you know, a lot of us think that we can just call plays because you just step back there and you've played Madden before and you're like, well, let's go to this formation and let's either hit X, square, circle, or if you play on the Xbox, X, A, B, like that's what people think, right? You just step back there and that's not as easy. You got to be able to scheme things where I'm working this off of this, and now I can run a play action because I ran a wide zone to the left, and now a bootleg's going to work off of that. Is he able to do that in real time? I hope so. Maybe he can. Again, it's just tough because we're working off of the same intel, and you're listening to the same intel I'm listening to. I'm saying I'm a little bit skeptical, and you're saying I'm fully on board, and that's totally fine. 301-230-0980. Where are you at on David Blau as the OC? Do you have an issue with how the hiring process went? And then off of that, how patient are you willing to be with David Blau? 301-230-0980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan. It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980. Toby Altizer sitting in for Kevin Sheehan today. He'll be back tomorrow. 301-230-0980 if you'd like to hop in. We were just discussing what Ben Standig had to say yesterday with Kevin about the hiring process for David Blau. And essentially saying, yeah, they did the necessary steps. They hired a couple people outside the building, or interviewed a couple people outside the building, interviewed a couple people inside the building. But ultimately, it was David Blau all along. You have an issue with that process, and also how patient are you willing to be with him as the OC going into this upcoming season? 301-230-0980. Steve is in Silver Spring. Steve, what's going on?
Yes, good afternoon. How are you? Love the show.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you. I kind of agree with you. I thought it was a little fast. We went from 48 hours before that. Mike McDaniel got released, and everybody's calling in. We're like, "Well, fly him here. Let's see what he says." He never made it here, did he? We never even brought him here.
No.
Or gave him a look.
No.
That was shocking to me, and I would have opened it up to a few more people. I think we need an experienced offensive coordinator, but I mean, I'm willing to give him a shot. You never know, but I do agree with you that the process was a little fast, based on what we did this past year. Offensively, we were a mess, offensively and defensively. I would have brought the best person possible in here. That's just my take on it. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, like he said, I'm willing to give it a try. We'll see what happens. I don't know that I fully agree with the process. And if you ultimately ended up with David Blau as the hire anyways, then does it really matter? I don't know. But I just feel like it was a little bit rushed, and maybe you should have given some other guys a try just to see. George in the comments on the Team 980 YouTube stream asked, do you think Adam Peters had any input in the hiring of Blau? It depends upon what you believe from what we've heard and the reports and what they have said themselves. If you're going off of what Adam Peters said in his press conference with Dan Quinn after the season and taking that 100% as that 100% truth, then no, he did not. Because he said at his post-season or after the season press conference that Dan Quinn has all the say in his coordinators and he controls that. Do you believe the Diana Rossini report? And do you believe the report from Jordan Schultz that there's some meddling going on? Then maybe there was some say. So I don't know. It just kind of depends upon which report whether you believe the report or whether you believe Adam Peters and what he truly says himself. I'm sure they worked together on this a little bit. They collaborated, I'm sure, and it's not something that Dan Quinn, without running by Adam Peters, or if Adam Peters maybe had thrown the idea out there. But I don't know. That's a good question. I think we'll have to figure that out. Get out to Anthony in D.C. Anthony, what's going on?
I'm good. How you doing?
Pretty good, man.
So, number one, I believe you contradicted yourself. So, on the one hand, you say that it's fine for Sean McVay to go from not being a play caller / offensive coordinator to being a head coach. But then you say Blau is not qualified from his position to jump into coordinating and calling plays. Number two, if you had your eyes on any other people who were head coaches before, none of them are signing as a coordinator until all of the head coaching positions are gone. So if that's the scenario, you risk being left with sloppy seconds, thirds, and fourths.
Sure.
So if you feel the man is qualified and you don't want to take a chance on missing out on whoever, then you got to make the move. You can't afford to sit around and wait.
Appreciate the phone call, Anthony. Yeah, I don't know that I said that McVay should have gone from position coach to head coach. I don't know that I'd said that. If I did, I misspoke, because I think there's steps to it, right? There's always going to be a risk when you hire someone that's never called plays. That just naturally happens. So the general idea of how you're going to go is you're going to go from where David Blau is assistant position coach to then a position coach. Then maybe you get even another promotion before you get to an OC job where you're maybe a run or a pass game coordinator, and then you'll step into the offensive coordinator chair as time goes on, and then eventually probably a head coach if you're good at your job, right? If you're really, really good and really well thought of. But yeah, of course, if you would have had Tavita Pritchard step in, if he were still here as the offensive coordinator, yeah, there'd be questions, hadn't called the plays and those sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, naturally that's going to be the case. When you get that promotion, you haven't done something before, there's always a little bit of a risk. I think the point that I'm going with is he's not just going from being the quarterback's coach to now being the offensive coordinator. He's going from being an assistant quarterback's coach to now being the offensive coordinator and only having been in that role for 2 years. Whereas you look at some of these other guys, McVay, LaFleur, McDaniel, they had served multiple seasons, even not just necessarily under the same regime, but multiple seasons. I have to go back and look exactly, but multiple seasons each as a position coach before they got their role as an offensive coordinator and calling plays. So, yeah, there's always a little bit of a risk there, but I don't necessarily agree with that. Trying to remember his other point about missing out on potential OCs if you're waiting on these head coaching candidates. That's a 100% valid point. And maybe that does play into some of their thought process of, yeah, we could wait for McDaniel, but what if we just miss out on him too because he gets a head coaching job? And by the way, we lost David Blau, who they obviously were very high on. They hired him, right? So if that's the case, then yeah, maybe they did have to make that move. I question if you're a little bit hasty there. I don't know. George says the difference is Blau did play quarterback in the NFL. Others didn't. Completely valid. He played, and that is another one of the positives. He played quarterback in this league, not a starting quarterback, but he played quarterback in this league not that long ago, so he can build a system directly around Jaden, knowing what he would have liked as a quarterback just a couple of years ago. Literally 3 years ago, he was playing quarterback in the NFL. So he could build something that says, yeah, this would have been friendly to me, obviously working some stuff that he's a different player than Jaden, working some stuff in there, but he can build something that is built off of Cliff's system, off of Ben Johnson's system, off of Kevin O'Connell's system. I'm not denying that there are a lot of pros to this move. Just a little bit hesitant on a guy with this little experience stepping in with so much on the line this year. Bill is in Fairfax. Bill, what's going on?
How are you? Thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
One thing you don't really give the Commanders credit for, they've known for, let's just say 4 months, 3 months, that they need an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. I'm sure they've done their research. They've made phone calls, back channel phone calls, interviewed people, not interviewed, but they know who David Blau is. They know how he leads a room. They know how he draws up plans. They know how he does this and this. Whatever the qualities of an offensive coordinator they're looking for, they believe he has it. Why allow a guy to go to Detroit and be taken away from you when you believe he's the guy? If that's the case, you hire him. And maybe some of these other candidates, backdoor-wise, aren't interested in coming here. We don't know all of that. But if this guy's qualified, they like him, they know what he is, it's an acceptable risk, which all of these hires would be some risk involved, some less than others. You hire the man and see what he has.
Appreciate the phone call. I think it's a good point. And I think it goes back to my original point I made a couple of days ago when this hire was made initially. My thought process is your confidence level in this move is directly related to your confidence level in Dan Quinn. Because my job, your job, Max's job, anybody around here's job, anybody working at the Post, anybody working at the Athletic, anyone covering the team, their job's not directly tied to David Blau working out. You know whose is? Dan Quinn. It's directly tied to how this is going to go. And so, to the caller's point, they know what this guy is. Again, we're all working off of the same reports about what people have said about this guy in the building, about how bright he is, about how smart he is. I don't know any more than that. Dan Quinn does, though. And Dan Quinn, with that information, decided that their best option and his best option to keep his job long-term was to go with David Blau. So if you're confident that Dan Quinn is the guy and Dan Quinn knows what he's doing and Dan Quinn understands what he's trying to accomplish with the offense, then yeah, you should be 100% confident if you're very confident in Dan Quinn. I'm a little less confident in Dan Quinn, hence I'm a little less confident in this move. I think that's very fair to say because, to the caller's point, they know exactly what David Blau is. The rest of us, the only insight we've got into what David Blau can be is hearsay and watching one clip from Hard Knocks where he's in the room and asks, hey, what'd you learn this year, to the quarterback room? Which is great. That doesn't tell me if he can call an offense. That doesn't tell me if he can scheme open wide receivers. But the people that have been in that building have seen how bright he can be. And they believe he can be the next guy that can be the next McVay, that can be the next Kyle Shanahan, that can be the next Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur. Take your pick of one of these young, bright minds. If they believe that, and you believe in the people over there, then there's no reason you should really question this. But if you have some reservations about what you're seeing from the coaching staff, which I do, because this year, and I've said this plenty of times, so many people this year run out and say, oh, it's the injuries, and that's why. That's why this season was so disastrous. Played a role, but I would say that if you put a pie chart as to what the issues were this season, a lot of people would put injuries probably at the 50% or more mark. It feels like a lot of people say that. And I would say that it's probably less than 25%, in my opinion. And so again, this is where we have differing opinions on this. This is where we look at it from different lenses. I have some questions about this coaching staff. And in turn, I'm questioning if they made the right evaluation here by going with David Blau. But if you have full confidence that they know what they're doing and they're 100% in the right, then yeah, hop fully on board and trust exactly what they're doing here, because this is a big roll of the dice. Big roll of the dice. But if you have full confidence that they can get things figured out, then I wouldn't blame you if you feel fully confident that David Blau is going to be the guy. 301-230-0980. We'll wrap up the show next, taking more of your phone calls on David Blau as the OC. Do you have an issue with how the hiring process went, where essentially David Blau and no one else? And how patient are you willing to be with David Blau in his first season as the OC? We'll wrap things up in the Kevin Sheehan Show next.
All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. We start off with a dominant defensive performance from the Houston Texans last night as they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers 30-6, including 2 defensive touchdowns for one of the best units in football. That means the divisional round is set. So here's the slate for this upcoming weekend. Saturday at 4:30, we got the Bills taking on the Broncos in Denver. That'll be on CBS. At 8 p.m., the night matchup, it'll be the 49ers in Seattle against the Seahawks. Again, 8 p.m. on Fox. And Sunday, the Texans, they take on the Patriots in Foxborough. That'll be at 3 p.m. on ESPN. And then finally, the Rams head up to Chicago to take on the Bears. That'll be at 6:30 on NBC. According to Ian Rappaport, the Commanders are interested in interviewing Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores for their open coordinator position. Flores' contract with Minnesota is up, and he is able to pursue other similar roles around the NFL. Plus, the Commanders have also requested to interview Falcons assistant DJ Williams. He is also the son of Doug Williams for the quarterback coach position. Also in the running is Panthers assistant quarterbacks coach Mike Bercovici, who also crossed paths with Jaden Daniels at Arizona State in 2019. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command throughout all of this offseason. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
Kevin Sheehan Show. Toby Altizer in for Kevin today. He'll be back tomorrow at his regular time. Appreciate you all hanging out today. Wrapping up with a discussion about David Blau. I also want to get to one other story real quick before we get out of here. But wrapping up our discussion on David Blau, I'm really intrigued by this move. Like I said, I've been more skeptical than it seems like a lot of people have been, but doesn't mean that it can't work out. And if they truly have hired the next really bright mind, then I'm excited about that. And I do think that being able to marry some of what Cliff did in this offense that allowed Jaden to be comfortable coming from college to the pros, adding in some of the RPO elements, having some of the read option stuff, having some of the up-tempo, no huddle, even though it's not really necessarily a traditional no huddle offense, I think is good. But I do think that in a new offense where you can get Jaden into a more traditional type of scheme is a good thing. And having a guy who has some of that relationship, some of that continuity with Jaden, maybe will allow him to push Jaden a little bit more than someone that didn't have that relationship. Jaden seems to be a guy that's really driven by his relationships with people. Just look at the way he treats his college teammates and how they feel about him, and the closeness that you've seen guys like Rashad White. Obviously, we've talked about Brandon Ayuk a ton. Talk about his LSU teammates, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. and those sorts of guys. He's someone that's clearly driven off of relationships and really holds those dear. So having a guy that's been with Jaden maybe is a big advantage in that because of the way that Jaden likes to operate. And I wonder if you can push him a little bit more because you have that relationship versus someone coming in with a new scheme that doesn't have that prior relationship. I don't know. But I do want to see them push Jaden in some new ways, like getting under center, like running a more traditional offense where we're taking command of the huddle, we're getting up to the line of scrimmage, we're getting in and out of plays as necessary, giving him more stuff, because I don't have an issue with them doing a lot of new stuff for Jaden, because I'm really confident Jaden's going to put the work in that's necessary to learn all these new things. So if they put in a bunch of new stuff where he's got to learn some new concepts, where he's got to do some things that he hasn't necessarily done in his first 2 years, I'm not all that worried about it. Matter of fact, I'd probably encourage it because it pushes him. It gives him a challenge. And it seems like he's one of those guys that when you throw something in front of him that is a challenge, he likes to attack it head on. And so having that extra motivation, those new things, those new concepts, I don't think is a bad thing for him. Having a run game that is coming from the Ben Johnson run game would be incredible. He's got the best run scheme going in the NFL right now. The way that he's able to create angles in the run game, help out his blockers by giving them advantageous ways to get to the second and third levels and ways that they can get better angles in the blocking game, and with some of the motions and stuff that they do, if he can take some of that from Ben Johnson, great. If he can take some of the quarterback development stuff from KOC, great. If he can take some of the concepts and some of the things that we saw Cliff do really well in his 2 seasons here, great. So there are positives to this. There are some things that you can marry together and really make work. I just question how easy it is to go from assistant quarterback coach to now sitting in the big chair of OC and be able to do that right away and be really effective. I think it's going to take some time. I think it's going to take some patience. And I think if fans are willing to be patient, if Adam Peters, Dan Quinn are willing to be patient, Josh Harris is willing to be patient, then this could be a fantastic hire. I'm just a little bit skeptical that going with someone with this little experience could also go the other way and end up poorly. But again, I hope I'm wrong there. Last thing I want to talk about before we get out of here real quick. There's something new that we're seeing in the NBA for one guy and one guy only. I think it kind of spells the end. It's kind of...
You think this is what spells the end?
I think it's alluding to the fact... I mean, there are numerous things. LeBron James last night was wearing a special patch on his jersey, and he's going to do it for the rest of the season to honor his 23rd NBA season. He was wearing it last night where he had made his debut in Sacramento. and it says NBA seasons 23. It's got him doing the chalk toss, and Topps is doing this where they'll remove it from the jersey after each game, and some will be placed into some ultra rare trading cards, which I think is really cool, by the way. I think it's cool that the trading card, sports cards have really kind of exploded over the last couple of years, even more than they already had. So I think that's kind of cool. But, I mean, this has got to be it for LeBron, right? I mean, if you're doing this,
You would think.
this has got to be it. It just started now, by the way. It's not like this was something they did at the beginning of the year. Like, this has to spell the
Well,
end.
actually, if I know LeBron like I think I do, it's going to be he's going to wear the patch the rest of this year. There's going to be an Aaron Rodgers style, will he, won't he come back? Is he in the last year of his contract?
I think every year is like a 1-year thing at this point, feels like.
I have I think LeBron's going to do a retirement tour next year, a la Coach K.
The other thing that makes me think he's done,
Mm-hmm.
this dude is full on into golf now.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
I mean, this dude has not cared about golf his entire career, and now he's tweeting about watching YouTube golf before games. I don't know, man.
This might be.
That's what I do. That's the stuff that I do. I'm going to go home and watch YouTube golf. LeBron's not supposed to be doing that. That's retirement stuff. I'm not retired, obviously, but I'm also not an elite athlete,
It's true.
as you can tell if you just look at me.
Well, we line it up out there. You got some pass rusher moves on you.
No. I could knock down a 3 if we're going on the basketball court. I could knock down a 3.
Not
Might
on
take
me,
a few
but-
chances. I got to warm up. But I think this might spell the end, man. It's kind of crazy. I mean, he's into YouTube golf. He's golfing all the time. I forget who it was. Someone said they don't want to hire a coach or someone that likes golf because it takes up so much of your time. And when you're a professional athlete you get into golf, like Steph Curry, he does not golf at all during the actual season because it takes up so much of his time, but he loves golf in the offseason. The fact that LeBron is like thinking about golf during the season makes me think he's thinking about retirement. And now he's wearing a jersey patch for the last half of the season saying, let's celebrate my 23 years in the NBA. That's got to be it, man. Like that's got to be the end of it. That's crazy.
Well, the Hugh Freeze thing was what it was, because that's how everybody found out he got fired, was because his tee times got canceled. And yeah, man, if you like golf, I'm good off you, man.
Speaking of tee times, Kevin Sheehan will be back for his regular time tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Appreciate everyone for listening, allowing me to sit in today for Kevin Sheehan. For Max, I'm Toby. Thanks for listening. Coming up next, the Rooster, Chris Russell, right here on the Team 980.